The scent of silver and death hung thick in the abandoned warehouse like a funeral shroud, mingling with the copper tang of blood that painted the concrete floor in spreading pools. Dr. Luna Ashworth pressed her trembling hands against the dying wolf's chest, feeling his life force ebb away beneath her palms like water through broken glass. Around her, shadows danced with supernatural menace as rival pack members circled in the flickering light of overhead bulbs, their eyes reflecting gold and amber in the darkness. But it wasn't the territorial dispute that made her heart race like a trapped bird against her ribs. It was the impossible recognition burning through every cell in her body as she locked eyes with the wounded alpha.
Mate.
The word whispered through her soul with the force of a prayer and the devastation of a curse. Even as her rare empathic healing gift screamed in agony, Luna felt the magnetic pull that had been written into her very DNA, calling to something deep and primal that she'd thought forever broken. Kai Blackthorne's massive frame sprawled across the cold concrete, his human form racked with convulsions as liquid silver coursed through his veins like molten fire. His dark hair, usually perfectly controlled, now clung to his forehead with sweat and blood. But his eyes, those piercing gray eyes that haunted pack legends, remained fixed on hers with an intensity that made her empathic abilities surge involuntarily. "Please," he whispered, his voice rough as gravel, carrying the authority of an alpha even in his weakness. "My pack, they need me." Thunder crashed overhead, shaking the warehouse windows as the storm that had been building all evening finally broke. Through the skylights, Luna could see the full moon emerging from behind storm clouds, its silver light streaming down to illuminate the supernatural tableau below. She felt her dormant wolf stir for the first time in her 26 years of life, a sensation like electricity dancing along her spine. "Step away from the Blackthorne Alpha Healer." The voice belonged to Marcus Silverclaw, her childhood friend and current beta of the Ashwood Exile Pack. His normally warm brown eyes held flecks of gold that betrayed his wolf's proximity to the surface. "This isn't our territory, and he isn't our concern." Luna's hands remained pressed against Kai's chest, feeling the erratic rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her palms. Her empathic gift painted vivid pictures of his pain, not just the physical agony of silver poisoning, but something deeper. Soul-deep trauma that had been slowly killing him for years, layer upon layer of emotional wounds that never healed. "I can't leave him," she said, her voice barely above a whisper but carrying clearly in the supernatural tension of the moment. "He's dying, Marcus. The silver has reached his heart." "And that's Blackthorne Pack business," Marcus replied, though she caught the uncertainty in his tone. Even he could sense the mate bond sparking between them, invisible to most, but blazing like a beacon to those with supernatural senses. "Luna, think about what you're doing. Our pack is already barely tolerated. Getting involved in territorial disputes." This wasn't a territorial dispute. The voice came from the shadows near the warehouse entrance, where a woman emerged with the fluid grace of a predator. Elena Blackthorne, Kai's sister and the pack's head enforcer, moved like liquid smoke across the concrete. Her midnight black hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her dark suit bore no trace of the violence that had clearly taken place here. This was an assassination attempt. Luna's hands began to glow with soft, opalescent light as her healing abilities activated despite her conscious control. The moment her power touched Kai's aura, she gasped as his pain flooded through her nervous system. But it wasn't just the silver poisoning, it was everything. Every pack member he'd lost, every impossible decision he'd made, every moment of isolation that came with alpha leadership. Through the empathic connection, she saw flashes of his memories. A young alpha watching his birth pack burn, the weight of leadership thrust upon him too early, the curse that bound him to experience every pack member's pain as his own. She saw the loneliness that ate at him like acid, the way he pushed everyone away to protect them from the darkness that lived inside him. What are you?" Kai's eyes widened as Luna's healing energy began to counteract the silver in his system. But instead of relief, his expression showed something approaching terror. "I can feel you in my mind." "I'm sorry," Luna whispered, tears streaming down her face as she absorbed fragments of his trauma. I can't control it completely. To heal you, I have to experience what you've been through. The warehouse suddenly filled with the sound of approaching vehicles, headlights cutting through the storm-darkened night. Elena's hand moved to the weapon at her side, her wolf's awareness scanning for threats. Ashwood pack, she asked Marcus. No, Marcus replied grimly, his own supernatural senses on high alert. These aren't our people. Luna felt Kai's strength returning as her healing energy flowed into him, but the process was draining her rapidly. Each of his memories that she absorbed left her reeling, decades of pain and responsibility weighing on her slim shoulders. She'd always been fragile from years of healing others, chronic pain from absorbed injuries, leaving her physically weakened despite her supernatural nature. Luna, we need to go.
Now.
Marcus moved toward her, but stopped when Kai's eyes flashed pure alpha gold. Don't touch her, Kai growled, his voice carrying the supernatural authority that made lesser wolves instinctively submit. Even weakened, his protective instincts were blazing. She's mine. The words sent shockwaves through everyone present. An alpha claiming a mate was sacred, but Luna belonged to an exile pack, wolves who had been cast out by their birth packs for various reasons and had banded together for survival. The political implications were staggering. That's impossible, Elena said flatly. You've never shown interest in any potential mate. The pack elders have been trying to arrange strategic partnerships for years. Luna helped Kai sit up, his strength mostly restored though silver burns still marked his skin like brandings. The moment their eyes met again, she felt the mate bond solidify with an almost audible click, like puzzle pieces sliding into perfect alignment. But instead of joy, all she felt was terror. She'd been abandoned once before for being different, cast out by her birth pack at 16 for being unable to shift. The pain of that rejection had never fully healed, and now she was supposedly mated to the most powerful alpha in 3 territories. The same alpha whose pack had been warring with her exile family for the past 5 years over access to the old healing grounds. The healing grounds, Luna whispered suddenly, understanding flooding through her. That's what this is about. Someone doesn't want the territorial dispute resolved. Kai's eyes sharpened, his alpha mind already working through the implications. The silver bullets were just meant to incapacitate me, not kill me. They wanted me found here, in neutral territory, with an Ashwood healer. A setup, Elena confirmed grimly. To make it look like your exile pack was responsible for attacking our alpha, she said to Marcus. The sound of car doors slamming echoed through the warehouse as their unknown visitors finally arrived. Luna helped Kai to his feet, acutely aware of how her small frame fit perfectly against his larger one, how his scent, pine and storm, and something uniquely male, made her wolf want to purr with contentment. Can you shift? She asked quietly. Kai tested his connection to his wolf and nodded. Thanks to you. But Luna, what you just did, that wasn't normal healing. I could feel you absorbing my pain, my memories. That's empathic healing. Do you know how rare that is? Before Luna could answer, the warehouse doors burst open and armed figures in tactical gear poured in. But these weren't ordinary humans. Luna's empathic senses immediately picked up the supernatural signatures. Rogue shifters, wolves who had abandoned pack bonds entirely and now operated as mercenaries. Well, said the leader, a scarred man whose wolf had been twisted by too many years without pack connection. Look what we have here. The mighty Blackthorne Alpha and his little exile mate. How touching. Elena moved with supernatural speed, placing herself between the rogues and her brother. Marcus flanked Luna's other side, his own protective instincts engaged despite the complicated politics. But there were at least a dozen rogues, all armed with silver-based weapons. What do you want? Kai demanded, his alpha presence filling the warehouse like a living thing. Just following orders, the scarred leader replied with a grin that showed too many teeth. Someone wants the healing grounds dispute to get very, very messy. And nothing creates chaos like a dead alpha and his mate. Luna felt her healing abilities surge again, but this time it wasn't to heal, it was responding to the threat to her newly discovered mate. Light began to emanate from her skin, and for the first time in her life, She felt her wolf rising to the surface. Not the broken, missing wolf that had gotten her exiled, but something powerful and ancient that had been sleeping in her bloodline for generations. "Everyone down," Elena shouted, recognizing the signs of an untrained shifter about to lose control. But as Luna's power exploded outward in a wave of pure empathic energy, something unexpected happened. Instead of the usual pain and trauma she absorbed from others, she began projecting healing and strength. Every person in the warehouse, friend and foe alike, suddenly felt their injuries healing, their energy restored, their connection to their wolves strengthened. The rogues stumbled backward, confusion replacing their predatory confidence. Pack bonds they'd severed years ago began to ache with phantom sensation. Memories of belonging, of purpose beyond mere survival, flooded back to them. "Impossible," the scarred leader whispered, his weapon lowering involuntarily. "You're not just a healer. You're a packbinder. They said you were all extinct." As Luna collapsed from the effort, the last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was Kai's face above hers, his gray eyes filled with a mixture of awe and terror that matched her own feelings exactly. Because if she truly was a packbinder, one of the legendary empathic healers who could create bonds between any shifters, regardless of bloodline or territory, then her presence would reshape the supernatural world whether she wanted it to or not. Luna awakened to the sensation of silk sheets against her skin and the unfamiliar scent of cedar and leather surrounding her like a protective cocoon. Consciousness returned slowly, bringing with it the memory of what had happened in the warehouse and the overwhelming realization that her entire life had just been turned upside down. She was no longer in the abandoned building where she'd healed Kai Blackthorne and apparently revealed herself as something that shouldn't exist anymore. Instead, she found herself in an elegant bedroom with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of dense forests stretching toward distant mountains. The full moon hung low on the horizon, painting everything in silver light that seemed to call to her very soul. "You're awake." The voice was warm, carefully modulated, but Luna's empathic senses immediately picked up the undercurrent of worry beneath the calm exterior. She turned to find a woman sitting in a leather chair beside the bed. Not Elena Blackthorne. This woman was older, with silver-streaked auburn hair and kind eyes that held depths of supernatural wisdom. She wore simple clothes that couldn't disguise the predatory grace in her movements or the authority that radiated from her like heat from a fire. "I'm Dr. Sarah Blackthorne," the woman said with a gentle smile. "Kai's aunt and the pack's chief medical advisor. You gave us quite a scare back there." Luna struggled to sit up, immediately regretting the movement as her head spun. Her empathic abilities felt raw and oversensitive, like exposed nerves. Every emotion in the vicinity, and there were many, crashed against her consciousness like waves against rocks. "Where am I?" she asked, though she already suspected the answer. "Blackthorne territory. Specifically the pack house. You've been unconscious for 18 hours. Sarah moved closer, her medical training evident in the way she checked Luna's pupils and felt for her pulse. "What you did in that warehouse, we've never seen anything like it." The rogues just walked away. No violence, no territorial posturing. They looked like they remembered what it felt like to belong somewhere. The memories came flooding back, the impossible power that had surged through her, the way she'd projected healing instead of absorbing pain. And underneath it all, the soul-deep recognition that had branded itself across her heart the moment she'd looked into Kai Blackthorne's eyes.
"Mate."
"Where is he?" Luna asked, though she didn't need to specify who she meant. Sarah's empathic senses would have picked up the mate bond the moment Luna regained consciousness. "Dealing with the political fallout," Sarah replied honestly. "What happened last night has implications that reach far beyond our pack. When word gets out that a pack binder has emerged, and that she's made it to the Blackthorne Alpha, every supernatural council from here to the Atlantic is going to want to get involved." Luna closed her eyes, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders like a lead blanket. She'd spent her entire adult life trying to fly under the radar, using her healing abilities quietly and carefully to avoid the kind of attention that had gotten her exiled in the first place. Now she was apparently something out of legend, bound to one of the most powerful alphas in North America. "I don't understand," she whispered. "I was broken. My pack cast me out because I couldn't shift because I was defective. How can I be something that's supposed to be extinct?" Sarah's expression grew thoughtful. "Tell me about your family, your birth pack." "The Moonrise Pack, up in northern Wisconsin. My parents died when I was 12. Hunting accident. The pack raised me, but when I didn't shift by 16. Luna's voice trailed off as old pain washed through her. "Alpha Morrison said I was a drain on pack resources. That my healing abilities weren't worth keeping a non-shifter around." "Morrison," Sarah repeated, her voice carefully neutral. "Tall man? Graying hair? Scar across his left cheek." Luna nodded, surprised by the specificity of the description. "I knew your mother," Sarah said quietly. "Before she made it into the Moonrise Pack, she was a Blackthorne. Elena Moonwhisper, she was my cousin." The words hit Luna like a physical blow. She stared at Sarah, searching her face for any sign of deception and finding none. "That's impossible," Luna breathed. "I would have known. Someone would have told me." "Your mother left under difficult circumstances," Sarah explained gently. "She fell in love with a wolf from outside our territory, and when she chose to leave with him, she asked that all ties be severed. It was her decision, and we respected it. But Luna, your mother was from the Moonwhisper bloodline, the genetic line that produced the last known packbinders." Luna's hands began to shake as the implications sank in. Everything she believed about herself, about her place in the supernatural world, had been built on lies and half-truths. "The healing grounds," she said suddenly, understanding flooding through her. "The territory dispute between the Blackthorne and Ashwood packs. Those were our ancestral lands, weren't they?" Sarah nodded. "Your mother's birthright. The Moonwhisper line has been bound to those sacred spaces for over 300 years. When she left, the territorial claims became complicated." A soft knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Sarah called permission to enter, and Luna's heart rate immediately spiked as Kai Blackthorne stepped into the room. He moved with the fluid grace of a predator, but Luna's empathic senses picked up the exhaustion beneath his controlled exterior. Dark circles shadowed his gray eyes, and the silver burns on his arms were still visible despite her healing efforts. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his voice careful and formal despite the mate bond that hummed between them like a living thing. "Confused," Luna answered honestly. "Scared. Like my entire life has been a lie." Kai's expression softened fractionally. "I know the feeling." He moved closer to the bed, and Luna caught his scent again, pine and storm, and something uniquely masculine that made her wolf want to purr with contentment. But underneath the attraction was something else, a bone-deep exhaustion that spoke of decades carrying burdens too heavy for one person to bear. "The rogues," Luna said. "What happened to them?" "Gone," Kai replied. "They left territorial markers asking for safe passage out of the region. 3 of them have requested meetings about potentially joining established packs again. What you did to them, it awakened connections they thought were permanently severed." Luna absorbed this information, trying to understand the scope of what had happened. If her abilities could restore pack bonds that had been deliberately broken, the implications were staggering. "There's something else," Kai continued, his tone growing more serious. "The silver bullets that were used on me, we had them analyzed. They weren't just meant to incapacitate. They were laced with a compound that would have prevented healing, even from our pack's medical team." "Someone wanted you dead," Luna said quietly. "More than that," Sarah interjected. "Someone wanted it to look like the Ashwood pack was responsible. The warehouse where you were found is technically neutral territory, but it's been abandoned for years. The only reason anyone would choose that location is if they wanted to implicate both packs in whatever happened." Luna felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with the room temperature. "They knew I would try to heal you. They were counting on it." Kai nodded grimly. "Which means someone has been watching you, studying your abilities and your connection to Marcus's exile pack. The question is who and what they ultimately want." Before Luna could respond, another knock echoed through the room. This time, Elena Blackthorne entered without waiting for permission, her dark eyes immediately scanning Luna with the intensity of a threat assessment. "We have a problem," Elena announced without preamble. "The Supernatural Council has called an emergency session. They want to see the pack binder for themselves." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Luna had heard whispers of the Supernatural Council, a governing body made up of the most powerful supernatural beings from across North America. They dealt with matters that affected multiple species and territories, and their summons was not something that could be ignored. "When?" Kai asked, his alpha authority sharpening to a razor's edge. 3 days. Denver. Elena's gaze moved to Luna. "They specifically requested that she attend." Not asked, requested. In council terminology, that's barely a step away from a command. Luna pulled the silk sheets higher around herself, suddenly feeling very small and very exposed. 3 days ago, she'd been a quiet healer living on the fringes of supernatural society. Now she was apparently expected to present herself before the most powerful supernatural authority in North America. "I can't," she whispered. "I don't know how to control what happened at the warehouse. What if I accidentally bind someone against their will? What if I hurt someone?" Kai moved to sit on the edge of the bed, careful to maintain a respectful distance despite the mate bond pulling them together like magnets. "You won't be going alone. As your mate, I have the right to accompany you." Assuming she accepts the bond, Elena pointed out with characteristic bluntness. Mate recognition doesn't automatically mean acceptance, especially given the political complications. Luna looked between the 3 faces watching her, feeling the weight of expectation pressing down like a physical force. Accept the mate bond with Kai, and she'd be drawn into pack politics and territorial disputes that she'd spent years avoiding. Reject it, and she'd be facing the Supernatural Council's interest as a lone wolf with no protection and no guidance for abilities she barely understood. "I need some time," she said finally, "to think, to understand what this all means." "Time isn't something we have a lot of," Sarah said gently. "Word about what happened at the warehouse is already spreading through supernatural communities. By tomorrow, every pack leader in a 500-mile radius is going to know that a pack binder has emerged. And that she's potentially mated to me," Kai added. "Which means our enemies will be looking for ways to use that against us, and our allies will be wondering what kind of power shift this represents." Luna closed her eyes, trying to process the avalanche of information and responsibility that had crashed down on her in less than 24 hours. Through her empathic senses, she could feel the emotional undercurrents in the room. Sarah's maternal concern mixed with scientific fascination, Elena's protective wariness and political calculation, and underneath it all, Kai's complex tangle of attraction, duty, and something that felt almost like hope. "The healing grounds," she said suddenly, opening her eyes to meet Kai's gaze. "If I really am connected to them through my bloodline, then maybe that's where I need to go to understand what's happening to me." Kai and Elena exchanged a look that was heavy with unspoken communication. "The healing grounds are contested territory," Elena said carefully. "The Ashwood Exile Pack has been using them without permission for the past 5 years, ever since the Moonrise Pack abandoned their claim. If you go there, it could be seen as taking sides in the territorial dispute. Or it could be seen as a Moonwhisper descendant reclaiming her birthright," Sarah countered. "The old laws are very clear about bloodline claims to sacred sites." Luna felt something stirring deep in her chest, not just her wolf, but something older and more primal. The call of ancient magic, of connections that transcended pack politics and territorial boundaries. "I have to go," she said with growing certainty. "Whatever's happening to me, whatever I'm becoming, I need to understand it. And I need to do it soon, before the council meeting." Kai nodded slowly. "Then we go together. Tomorrow night, during the dark moon when your abilities will be less likely to surge unexpectedly." "The dark moon is when pack binders were traditionally trained," Sarah added thoughtfully. "When the lunar influence is at its weakest, empathic abilities become more manageable." Luna looked around the room at these 3 strangers who were rapidly becoming the most important people in her newly complicated life. For the first time since waking up, she felt a flicker of hope alongside the terror. Maybe she didn't have to face this transformation alone after all. The healing grounds lay in a natural bowl between rolling hills, accessible only by a narrow deer path that wound through ancient oak and maple trees. Luna followed Kai through the forest in human form, her empathic senses drinking in the supernatural resonance that grew stronger with each step. The very air seemed to shimmer with accumulated magic, decades of healing rituals and pack ceremonies leaving their mark on the landscape itself. "I can feel them," Luna whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of their footsteps on fallen leaves. "The healers who came before me. Their presence is still here." Kai glanced back at her, his gray eyes reflecting the starlight filtering through the canopy above. "The Moon Whisper line practiced here, for centuries. Your great-grandmother was legendary. She could heal injuries that should have been fatal, restore bonds that had been severed by trauma or betrayal." They emerged into the sacred grove just as the dark moon reached its zenith, and Luna gasped at the sight before her. The healing grounds were more beautiful than she had imagined, a perfect circle of grass surrounded by standing stones that hummed with contained power. In the center grew a massive willow tree, its trailing branches creating a natural sanctuary that seemed to glow with soft, opalescent light. "The heart tree," Kai said softly. According to pack lore, it was planted by the first Moonwhisper packbinder over 300 years ago. Its roots reached down to an underground spring that's said to have healing properties. Luna approached the ancient willow with reverent steps, her empathic abilities responding to the accumulated emotions embedded in the sacred space. She could sense generations of healers who had knelt beneath these branches, feel the echoes of pain transformed into healing, of broken bonds mended and strengthened. As her fingers touched the tree's bark, images flooded her consciousness with startling clarity. She saw her great-grandmother, Elena Moonwhisper, working beneath these same branches to heal a pack that had been decimated by disease. She saw her grandmother teaching young healers to channel their abilities safely, to distinguish between empathic absorption and projection. And finally, she saw her mother, young, beautiful, and radiating the same power that now coursed through Luna's veins. "She left because she was afraid," Luna said suddenly, understanding flooding through her as the visions continued. "My mother." She could feel her abilities growing stronger, more uncontrollable. "When she fell in love with my father, she was terrified that her power would hurt him or their future children." Kai moved to stand beside her, careful not to interrupt the connection but close enough that she could feel his steadying presence. "What else do you see?" Luna pressed both palms against the heart tree's trunk, allowing the visions to flow through her uncensored. The accumulated memories of her bloodline painted a complex picture of power and responsibility, of healers who had shaped pack politics and supernatural alliances through their unique abilities. "Packbinders weren't just healers," she said, her voice growing stronger as understanding dawned. "They were peacemakers. They could create bonds between wolves from different territories, different bloodlines, even different species. They prevented wars by helping enemies understand each other's pain. And they were hunted for it," Kai added grimly, "by those who profited from conflict, who wanted to maintain the barriers between packs." Luna's visions shifted, showing her darker memories, packbinders who had been assassinated, sacred sites that had been desecrated, entire bloodlines that had been hunted to extinction by those who feared what empathic healing could accomplish. "The rogues," she whispered, "in the warehouse. When my power touched them, they remembered what it felt like to belong. If I can do that on a larger scale..." "You could reshape the entire supernatural political landscape," Kai finished. "Which is exactly why someone tried to kill me and implicate your exile pack. They want to prevent any alliance between us, any chance that your abilities might be used to bridge the territorial disputes that keep packs divided." Luna turned to face him, acutely aware of how the moonlight played across his strong features, how his presence made her feel both safe and terrifyingly vulnerable. The mate bond hummed between them like a living thing, complicated by the political implications of their connection. "There's something else," she said softly. "The visions are showing me why pack binders always mated with alphas. It wasn't just about political alliances. Our abilities are too powerful to control alone. We need an anchor, someone whose strength can help us channel the empathic connection safely. Kai's expression grew thoughtful. The curse that binds me to my pack's pain, you could feel it when you healed me. Could you help me transform it into something useful instead of something that's slowly killing me? Luna nodded slowly, understanding the magnitude of what he was asking. If she could help Kai transform his supernatural burden into a tool for stronger pack bonds, they could create something unprecedented, a pack based not on dominance and territorial control, but on healing and empathic connection. It would mean accepting the mate bond, she said quietly. Fully, completely. No going back. I know. Kai stepped closer, his voice rough with emotion. Luna, I've been alone for so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like to want something for myself instead of just for my pack. But when I look at you, when I feel the connection between us. He trailed off, but Luna's empathic senses filled in what he couldn't say aloud. She could feel his longing, his fear, his desperate hope that maybe this time he wouldn't have to carry his burdens alone. Show me, she said suddenly. Through the pack bond. Show me what it would mean to be your mate, to be part of your pack. Kai's eyes widened. Luna, that's incredibly intimate. Once you experience a pack bond at that level, there's no undoing it. Even if you choose to leave afterward, you'll always carry part of us with you. I know. Luna placed her hand over his heart, feeling the steady rhythm beneath her palm. But I need to understand what I'm choosing. All of it. Kai nodded slowly, then placed his own hand over hers. Open your empathic barriers completely. Let me show you what it means to be Blackthorne. Luna took a deep breath and lowered every psychic defense she'd built over the years, opening herself to the full force of Kai's emotions and memories. The connection hit her like a tidal wave, centuries of pack history flooding through her consciousness in vivid detail. She experienced his childhood, the weight of alpha expectations from the moment he could walk, the pressure to be stronger, faster, better than everyone around him. She felt his teenage years, when his supernatural gifts first manifested and he began experiencing his pack mate's emotions as if they were his own. She lived through the night when rogue shifters had attacked his birth pack, how he'd felt every death as if it were his own body being torn apart. But underneath the trauma and responsibility, Luna found something unexpected, a core of unshakable loyalty and protective love that had never been broken despite everything Kai had endured. He loved his pack with a fierce devotion that transformed his supernatural burden into a source of strength. Every sacrifice he made, every lonely decision he bore alone, was motivated by an absolute commitment to protecting those under his care. I can feel them, Luna whispered, her consciousness expanding beyond Kai to touch the edges of his pack bonds. Sarah's maternal wisdom, Elena's fierce loyalty, Marcus. Wait, Marcus? Through the empathic connection, Luna sensed a familiar presence at the edge of Kai's territorial awareness. Her childhood friend was approaching the healing grounds, and he wasn't alone. The exile pack, Kai said grimly, his alpha senses confirming what Luna's empathic abilities had detected. They know you're here. Luna reluctantly pulled back from their mental connection, though she could still feel the echo of pack bond awareness singing through her consciousness. The experience had left her changed, marked by the depth of connection that true pack membership offered. They're not here to fight, she said with certainty. Marcus is confused. Hurt. He thinks I've abandoned them for a more powerful pack. Have you? Kai asked quietly, his gray eyes searching her face. Chosen, I mean. Because once word gets out that you've been to the healing grounds with me, every supernatural council from here to the Pacific is going to assume that you've accepted the Blackthorne Alliance. Luna looked around the sacred grove, feeling the weight of ancestral wisdom and the pull of destiny converging on this moment. Her empathic abilities showed her glimpses of possible futures, paths where she embraced a role as a pack binder, others where she tried to return to her quiet life of isolated healing, still others where she fled the supernatural world entirely. But in every vision where she walked away, she saw the same result: conflict, territorial wars, and the slow erosion of the bonds that held supernatural communities together. The world needed pack binders, needed the healing and understanding that empathic connection could provide. "I choose you," she said finally, the words carrying the weight of supernatural vow. "I choose this. All of it." The moment the words left her lips, the mate bond between them solidified with an almost audible click. Luna gasped as Kai's emotions flooded through her, relief so profound it brought tears to her eyes, love that burned bright and clean, and underneath it all, a bone-deep gratitude that he would no longer have to face his burdens alone. The heart tree's branches rustled without any wind, and Luna felt the ancient magic of the healing grounds responding to their bonded presence. Light began to emanate from the willow's trunk, spreading outward in concentric circles until the entire grove glowed with soft, welcoming radiance. "The land recognizes you," Kai said wonderingly. "The healing grounds accept our bond." But before Luna could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps interrupted this sacred moment. Marcus Silverclaw emerged from the tree line, flanked by 3 other members of the Ashwood Exile Pack. His expression was carefully neutral, but Luna's empathic senses picked up the storm of emotions beneath his controlled exterior. "Luna," Marcus said, his voice carrying the weight of childhood friendship and current betrayal. "We need to talk." As her old life and new destiny converged in the sacred grove, Luna realized that the hardest part of accepting her role as pack-binder wouldn't be learning to control her power. It would be navigating the complex web of relationships and loyalties that her transformation had irrevocably changed. The tension in the sacred grove was thick enough to cut with a knife as Marcus Silverclaw and his companions formed a loose semicircle around Luna and Kai. The gentle glow emanating from the heart tree seemed to pulse in rhythm with the supernatural energies radiating from the assembled shifters, creating an otherworldly atmosphere that made every emotion feel amplified. "You couldn't even tell us yourself," Marcus said, his voice carefully modulated but carrying undertones of hurt that Luna's empathic senses picked up like a physical blow. "We had to hear from pack scouts that our healer was seen entering Blackthorne territory with their alpha." Luna felt Kai tense beside her, his protective instincts responding to what his wolf perceived as a challenge to his mate. But she placed a gentle hand on his arm, using their newly solidified bond to project calm and understanding. "Marcus, I know how this looks," Luna began, stepping forward to close some of the distance between them. "But I needed answers, and this place, these are my ancestral healing grounds. I had every right to come here." With him, Marcus's brown eyes flicked to Kai with barely concealed hostility. "Luna, the Blackthorne pack, has been trying to force us out of these territories for 5 years. Now suddenly their alpha shows up claiming to be your mate, and you're ready to abandon everything we've built together." Behind Marcus, Luna recognized the other Exile Pack members. Jenny Ravenwood, a beta who'd been cast out for refusing an arranged mating, Thomas Ironbark, an Omega whose unusual strength had threatened his birth pack's hierarchy, and Vera Nightshade, a former lone wolf whose mysterious past had never quite been explained. All of them had found belonging with the Ashwood Exiles after being rejected by traditional pack structures. "I'm not abandoning anyone," Luna said firmly, though she could feel the truth was more complicated than that simple statement. Her empathic connection to Kai and the glimpse she'd experienced of Blackthorne pack bonds had shown her a level of belonging she'd never imagined possible. But it had also made her acutely aware of what she'd be asking the Exile Pack to sacrifice. "Then explain this," Jenny said, pulling out a smartphone and showing Luna the screen. The image displayed was grainy, clearly taken from a distance, but it unmistakably showed Luna and Kai entering the healing grounds together. "This photo has been circulating through supernatural social networks for the past 3 hours. Every pack within a 500-mile radius thinks you formally allied with the Blackthorns." Luna felt her heart sink as she realized the scope of the political firestorm her actions had unleashed. In the supernatural world, perception often mattered more than reality, and the image of her entering sacred territory with an alpha would be interpreted as a formal declaration of alliance. The Supernatural Council has already received formal complaints, Thomas added, his usually quiet voice heavy with concern. The Ironwood Pack claims the Blackthorns are using an exile healer to legitimize their territorial expansion. The Silver Ridge Pack is demanding an emergency session to address what they're calling the pack binder situation. Kai stepped forward, his alpha presence filling the grove like a tangible force. The Ashwood Pack has my word that Luna's abilities will never be used to force territorial concessions or political alliances. Her empathic gifts are her own to control. Your word, Vera said with a bitter laugh. Forgive us if we don't find that particularly reassuring. Alphas have been making promises to exiles for decades, right up until those promises become inconvenient. Luna could feel the conversation spiraling toward conflict, emotions escalating on all sides despite her unconscious efforts to project calm. Her empathic abilities were still raw from the intense bonding experience with Kai, making it difficult to maintain the precise control needed to defuse supernatural tensions. There's something else, Marcus said, his voice dropping to a more serious tone. Something we discovered after you disappeared yesterday. Luna, we found evidence that someone has been watching you for months. The word sent a chill down Luna's spine. She exchanged a quick glance with Kai, whose expression had sharpened to dangerous focus. What kind of evidence? Kai demanded. Jenny pulled out a small electronic device about the size of a coin. Surveillance equipment, hidden in the trees around Luna's healing sanctuary. Professional grade, supernatural spectrum capable. Someone has been recording not just her activities, but the empathic resonances of her healing sessions. Luna stared at the device, feeling violated in a way that went beyond mere invasion of privacy. Her healing work was sacred, deeply personal. The idea that someone had been studying her abilities, analyzing her empathic connections with patients, made her feel exposed and vulnerable. How long, she whispered. Based on the data storage capacity, at least 6 months, Thomas replied. Possibly longer. Kai's growl rumbled low in his chest, a sound that made every other shifter in the grove take an involuntary step backward. Someone has been building a profile of her abilities, studying her patterns. The attack on me, the setup at the warehouse, it was all planned. But by whom? Luna asked, though even as she spoke her empathic senses were picking up something wrong. One of the emotional signatures in the grove didn't match the others. There was a carefully controlled calm that felt artificial, practiced. Her eyes moved across the faces of the Exile Pack members, and when her gaze reached Vera, she felt her heart skip a beat. The woman's emotional aura was too controlled, too perfectly neutral for someone who claimed to be concerned about Luna's safety. Vera, Luna said quietly, her empathic abilities focusing on the former lone wolf's carefully constructed mental barriers. How did you know exactly where to find us tonight? Vera's expression didn't change, but Luna felt the subtle shift in her emotional resonance, the flicker of calculation that preceded deception. Marcus said you'd probably come here eventually, Vera replied smoothly. It was logical. Was it? Kai's voice carried the supernatural authority of an alpha who detected a threat to his mate. Because this location isn't exactly common knowledge. The healing grounds are hidden, protected by natural barriers and supernatural camouflage. Even pack members need specific directions to find them. Luna felt her empathic abilities surge, her newly awakened power cutting through Vera's mental defenses like a knife through silk. What she found underneath made her blood run cold. Vera Nightshade wasn't just a former lone wolf seeking belonging with the Exile Pack. She was a spy, a plant carefully positioned to monitor Luna's developing abilities. Her emotional signature revealed training, discipline, and loyalty to an organization that existed in the shadows of supernatural society. The Council, Luna breathed, understanding flooding through her. You're working for the Supernatural Council. Vera's carefully maintained facade cracked for just a moment, long enough for everyone present to see the truth behind her mask. When she spoke again, her voice carried an entirely different tone, professional, cold, utterly without remorse. The Council has been monitoring potential pack binder manifestations for decades, Vera said calmly. When your abilities began developing beyond normal empathic healing parameters, it became necessary to establish closer surveillance. Marcus looked stricken, his emotional aura radiating betrayal and self-recrimination. How long, Vera? How long have you been lying to us? Since the day I joined your little band of outcasts, Vera replied with clinical detachment. 2 years of playing the grateful refugee, earning your trust, documenting every instance of Luna's growing power. Jenny and Thomas moved to flank Marcus, their protective instincts engaged despite the shock of revelation. But Vera made no move to flee or fight. She simply stood there, radiating the confidence of someone who knew backup was coming. The council has been very interested in Luna's development, Vera continued, her gaze fixed on Luna with unsettling intensity. Especially her ability to project empathic healing rather than simply absorbing trauma. That's not something packbinders were historically capable of. What do they want? Kai demanded, moving closer to Luna in unconscious protection. To study her initially. To understand the evolution of her abilities and determine whether she represents an opportunity or a threat to supernatural stability. Vera's smile was sharp as glass. But after tonight's display at the healing grounds, after the formal mate bond with a territorial alpha, the council's position has shifted. Luna felt the temperature in the grove drop several degrees, her empathic senses screaming warnings as supernatural tensions reached a breaking point. Shifted how? Luna asked, though she dreaded the answer. The council has classified you as a Class 5 supernatural entity, too powerful to remain uncontrolled, too dangerous to be allowed free choice in how your abilities are utilized. Vera's words carried the weight of official pronouncement. By order of the North American Supernatural Council, you are to be taken into protective custody pending formal evaluation of your threat level. The words had barely finished echoing through the grove when the forest around them exploded into motion. Figures in tactical gear emerged from concealment positions, moving with the coordinated precision of trained operatives. Luna counted at least a dozen, all carrying weapons that gleamed with the telltale sheen of silver-based ammunition. But these weren't rogues like the ones from the warehouse. These were council enforcers, the supernatural world's equivalent of federal agents. They operated with legal authority across territorial boundaries, and their mandate to maintain supernatural secrecy gave them broad powers to detain and relocate potential threats. Stand down, Alpha Blackthorne. The lead enforcer called out, his voice amplified by supernatural authority. The healer will come with us voluntarily, or we will use whatever force is necessary to ensure compliance. Kai's response was immediate and instinctive, a roar of alpha dominance that shook leaves from the trees and sent small animals fleeing in terror. His wolf surged to the surface, eyes blazing gold in the starlight, every line of his body screaming challenge to those who dared threaten his mate. She's under my protection, Kai snarled, his voice carrying harmonics that made the enforcers' weapons tremble in their hands. Any attempt to take her will be considered an act of war against the Blackthorne pack. Luna felt the mate bond flare between them, Kai's protective fury flooding through her empathic connection with overwhelming intensity. But underneath his rage, she sensed something else, a desperate fear that he was about to lose the one person who had made him feel whole in decades. The enforcers raised their weapons, silver bullets gleaming in chambers designed to incapacitate even the strongest supernatural beings. The Exile Pack members spread into defensive positions, their own transformations beginning despite being outnumbered and outgunned. In the center of it all, Luna stood beneath the heart tree with the weight of destiny pressing down on her shoulders. The ancient willow's branches rustled without wind, responding to the supernatural tensions threatening to tear the sacred grove apart. She could feel her empathic abilities building, responding to the extreme emotions radiating from every person present. But unlike the warehouse, where her power had exploded outward in an uncontrolled burst, Luna now understood what she was capable of. The visions from the heart tree had shown her techniques passed down through generations of packbinders, methods for channeling empathic energy with surgical precision. Wait, Luna said, her voice carrying clearly despite its quiet tone. Every person in the grove, enforcer and pack member alike, felt compelled to listen. There's another way. She stepped forward, moving away from Kai's protective presence toward the center of the confrontation. Her empathic abilities reached out, touching the emotional signatures of everyone present, mapping the complex web of loyalties, fears, and motivations that drove their actions. "You're afraid," she said to the lead enforcer, her voice gentle but implacable. "All of you. You've been told that packbinders are dangerous, unpredictable, capable of destroying the carefully maintained balance between supernatural communities." The enforcer's weapon wavered slightly, his professional composure cracking under the weight of Luna's empathic insight. "But what if I told you that's exactly backwards?" Luna continued, her power building with each word. "What if packbinders weren't meant to destroy supernatural society, but to heal it? To bridge the gaps between species and territories that keep us isolated and afraid?" Light began to emanate from Luna's skin, soft and warm and completely unthreatening. But instead of the explosive burst of power that had overwhelmed the rogues, this was controlled, focused, surgical in its precision. She reached out with her abilities, touching each person's emotional core and showing them a glimpse of what empathic connection truly meant. The enforcers experienced a moment of perfect understanding with their targets, feeling the genuine fear and protective love that motivated resistance to their authority. The pack members felt the weight of responsibility that drove the enforcers' actions, the genuine belief that they were protecting supernatural society from a potential threat. "This is what packbinders do," Luna said softly, her power weaving connections of understanding between former enemies. "We don't force bonds or control minds. We simply help people remember that underneath all the politics and territorial disputes, we're not so different after all." The lead enforcer slowly lowered his weapon, his face showing the wonder of someone experiencing true empathic connection for the first time. Around the grove, the others followed suit, supernatural tensions dissolving in the face of genuine understanding. "The council needs to see this," he said quietly. "Not as a demonstration of power, but as proof that packbinders aren't the threat they've been portrayed as." Luna nodded, feeling the weight of decisions settling on her shoulders. "Then I'll come with you. Not as a prisoner, but as someone willing to show the council what empathic healing truly means." Kai's anguish flooded through their mate bond, his wolf howling at the prospect of separation. But Luna turned to him with eyes full of love and determination. "This is why we were brought together," she said softly, her words meant for him alone. "Not just to heal each other, but to heal the wounds that keep our entire world divided." As dawn broke over the healing grounds, Luna Ashworth prepared to face her destiny as the last packbinder, and the first to choose cooperation over conflict in the supernatural world's long history of fear and misunderstanding. The Supernatural Council's headquarters in Denver was an imposing structure of glass and steel that rose from the Rocky Mountain foothills like a monolithic tooth. To human eyes, it appeared to be nothing more than another corporate complex, its true nature hidden by layers of mystical camouflage that made mundane minds look away without conscious thought. But Luna's empathic senses could feel the accumulated power radiating from the building like heat from a forge. Centuries of supernatural authority and political maneuvering had soaked into the very foundations. She stood in the passenger seat of Kai's truck, watching the building grow larger as they approached through the pre-dawn darkness. The 3-day journey from the healing grounds had passed in a blur of preparation and planning, but now that they were actually here, Luna felt her courage beginning to waver. "Remember," Kai said quietly, his voice rough with barely controlled emotion, "you don't have to prove anything to them. Your abilities speak for themselves." Luna nodded, though she could feel his anxiety through their mate bond as clearly as her own. The council enforcers had been professional during the journey, even respectful after witnessing her demonstration at the healing grounds. But respect didn't mean understanding, and understanding didn't guarantee that the council would see her as an opportunity rather than a threat. Dr. Ashworth, the lead enforcer, Agent Morrison, called from the driver's seat. "We'll be entering the secure zone in approximately 2 minutes. I want to remind you that any display of empathic abilities within the council chambers without explicit permission will be considered an act of aggression." Luna exchanged a glance with Kai, noting the irony of the surname. She'd been thinking about her birth pax Alpha during the drive. wondering how different her life might have been if Morrison had seen her gifts as valuable rather than defective. "What exactly am I walking into?" Luna asked, though she'd asked the same question multiple times during their journey and never received a completely satisfactory answer. "A formal evaluation hearing," Agent Morrison replied. "Representatives from the major supernatural species will assess your abilities and determine the appropriate level of oversight for your activities going forward." Luna felt her stomach drop. Oversight. The Council has broad authority to regulate supernatural individuals whose abilities pose potential risks to the established order, Morrison explained with clinical detachment. In extreme cases, this can include relocation to secure facilities, power suppression through mystical binding, or... He trailed off, apparently deciding some information was better left unspoken. Kai's growl filled the truck's cabin, his alpha fury making the air shimmer with barely contained violence. "If they try to harm her..." "Alpha Blackthorne," Morrison interrupted, his tone carrying a warning, "I strongly advise against making threats within hearing range of Council enforcers. Your mate's situation is complicated enough, without adding charges of intimidating federal supernatural agents." Luna placed a calming hand on Kai's arm, using their bond to project reassurance she didn't entirely feel. Through her empathic senses, she could detect the genuine conflict in Morrison's emotional signature. He'd been as affected by her demonstration at the healing grounds as the others, but he was still bound by duty and protocol. "Agent Morrison," Luna said carefully, "what you experienced at the healing grounds, the empathic connection, the understanding between former enemies, is that something the Council has encountered before?" Morrison was quiet for several moments, his professional composure warring with personal reflection. "No," he finally admitted. "In 15 years of enforcer work, I've never felt anything like that. Most empathic abilities are invasive, overwhelming. What you did, it was like being offered a gift rather than having something forced on you." The truck passed through a security checkpoint that involved more than just showing identification. Luna felt mystical scanners examining her supernatural signature, cataloging her abilities with scientific precision. The sensation was deeply uncomfortable, like being X-rayed by something that could see directly into her soul. Extensive empathic resonance detected, a disembodied voice announced through speakers hidden in the checkpoint structure. Classification: Unknown variant. Threat level: Indeterminate. Cleared for escorted entry to Sublevel 3. Luna shivered at the clinical description of her abilities. She was being reduced to data points and threat assessments, her gifts viewed through the lens of potential danger rather than healing opportunity. They entered an underground parking garage that descended much deeper than any civilian structure would require. Luna counted at least 5 sublevels before Morrison finally parked the truck in a space marked with official council insignia. "Dr. Ashworth, Alpha Blackthorne," Morrison said formally, "please remain close to your escort at all times. The council complex contains numerous secured areas that are strictly off-limits to non-authorized personnel." Luna stepped out of the truck and immediately felt the weight of supernatural authority pressing down on her like a physical force. The air itself seemed thick with accumulated power, making her empathic abilities struggle to function properly. Everything felt muffled, contained, artificially constrained. "Suppression field," Kai said grimly, noting her discomfort. "They're dampening supernatural abilities throughout the complex." "Standard security protocol," Morrison confirmed as he led them toward a bank of elevators. "The council chambers require precise control of supernatural energies to prevent incidents." The elevator ride to Sublevel 3 seemed to take forever, though Luna realized that was probably an effect of the suppression field distorting her perception of time. When the doors finally opened, she found herself facing a reception area that looked more like a luxury hotel lobby than a government facility. "Dr. Luna Ashworth and Alpha Kai Blackthorne," Morrison announced to the receptionist, a woman whose perfectly human appearance couldn't quite hide the predatory grace that marked her as a supernatural being of considerable power. "Reporting for council evaluation hearing at 0800 hours. The receptionist's smile was professional and completely without warmth. "Dr. Ashworth, you'll be processed separately from your companion." Council protocol requires that empathic subjects be evaluated without external supernatural influences. Luna felt her heart skip a beat. Separating her from Kai would mean losing the steadying influence of their mate bond, leaving her to face the Council's judgment without the one source of strength she'd come to rely on. That's not acceptable, Kai said flatly, his alpha authority asserting itself despite the suppression field. I have the right to accompany my mate to any official proceeding. Under normal circumstances, yes, the receptionist replied with unruffled calm. However, Dr. Ashworth's case falls under special classification protocols. As a potential Class 5 supernatural entity, she must be evaluated in isolation to ensure accurate assessment of her individual capabilities. Luna felt the walls closing in around her as the reality of her situation became clear. The Council wasn't just evaluating her abilities, they were treating her as a potential weapon that needed to be contained and controlled. How long? Luna asked quietly. The evaluation process typically takes 48 to 72 hours, the receptionist replied, depending on the complexity of the subject's abilities and the Council's deliberation time. 3 days of isolation, of being poked and prodded and studied like a laboratory specimen. Luna's empathic senses recoiled from the prospect, her abilities already struggling under the weight of the suppression field. I'll wait, Kai said firmly. However long it takes, I'll be here when she comes out. The receptionist's expression suggested she found his devotion either touching or foolish. Alpha Blackthorne, the Council has arranged accommodations for you at a nearby hotel. There's no need to remain in the complex during the evaluation period. I'm not leaving, Kai replied with the sort of finality that brooked no argument. She goes where I can sense her through our bond, or she doesn't go at all. Luna felt a rush of love and gratitude flood through their connection, even dampened as it was by the suppression field. Kai was risking political complications and potential charges to ensure she didn't face this ordeal alone. Very well, the receptionist said with a barely perceptible sigh. Alpha Blackthorne may remain in the visitors area on sublevel 1. Dr. Ashworth, please follow Agent Morrison to the evaluation suite. Luna turned to Kai, knowing this might be the last time she saw him for days. The suppression field made their bond feel distant and muffled, but she could still sense his love and unwavering support flowing through their connection. Whatever they show you, whatever they try to make you believe about your abilities, Kai said softly, his hands framing her face with gentle reverence, remember what you felt at the healing grounds. Remember the peace you brought to those enforcers, the understanding you created between enemies. Luna nodded, drawing strength from his confidence in her. If I don't come out the same person who went in. You will, Kai interrupted firmly. Because you're stronger than they realize, stronger than even you realize. And because I'll be waiting for you, no matter what they decide. Their kiss was brief but intense, carrying all the love and promise and desperate hope they couldn't voice aloud. When they separated, Luna felt like she was leaving part of herself behind. But underneath the trauma, Luna sensed something else, a core of strength and loyalty that had somehow survived the brutal severing of his pack bonds. David wasn't broken. He was healing badly, like a bone that had been set incorrectly and needed to be rebroken to mend properly. You're not defective, Luna said, her voice carrying absolute conviction despite the dampening field's interference. Your pack was afraid of what you represented. Change, evolution, the possibility that their rigid structure wasn't the only way to be supernatural. David's eyes widened as Luna's empathic touch began to carefully separate trauma from identity, showing him the difference between what had been done to him and who he truly was beneath the pain. I can feel it, he whispered, wonder replacing despair in his emotional signature. The connection to my wolf, it's still there. Damaged, but not destroyed. Luna continued her careful work, using techniques that seemed to flow from some ancestral memory embedded in her genetic code. She didn't force healing on David's traumatized psyche. Instead, she showed him how to recognize the parts of himself that had remained whole, how to build new connections from a foundation of self-acceptance rather than pack approval. Around the room, Luna was dimly aware of the monitoring equipment going haywire, readings spiking beyond normal parameters as her abilities demonstrated capabilities that apparently exceeded the researchers' expectations. Fascinating, Dr. Voss murmured, studying her tablet with intense concentration. Dr. Ashworth, you're not just healing his trauma. You're rebuilding his supernatural identity from the ground up. We've never seen empathic reconstruction on this scale. But Luna wasn't paying attention to the researchers anymore. Through her connection with David, she was beginning to sense something else. Other presences in the facility, other supernatural beings who were experiencing various forms of trauma and disconnection. The council apparently kept a collection of damaged individuals for research purposes, studying the breakdown of supernatural psychology with the same clinical detachment they were now applying to her abilities. There are others, Luna said suddenly, her empathic senses expanding despite the dampening field's constraints. Dozens of them. Exiles, rogues, supernatural beings who've been damaged by rejection or trauma. Dr. Voss's expression sharpened with interest. Can you sense them from here? Through the facility's dampening fields. Luna nodded slowly, realizing too late that she was revealing more about her capabilities than might be wise. But the pull of suffering supernatural beings was too strong to ignore. Her healer's instincts demanded response to pain wherever she encountered it. Dr. Ashworth, Dr. Voss said with growing excitement, would you be willing to attempt contact with one of our more challenging cases? We have a subject who's been unresponsive to traditional therapeutic approaches. Before Luna could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Red lights flashed in the sterile corridors beyond the evaluation suite, and the dampening field flickered as emergency power systems activated. What's happening? Luna demanded, but she was already reaching out with her empathic senses, trying to understand the source of the crisis. What she found made her blood run cold. Somewhere in the facility, a supernatural being was experiencing a complete psychological breakdown, the kind of catastrophic trauma response that could tear through mystical barriers and endanger everyone in the vicinity. Sublevel 5, Dr. Voss said grimly, consulting emergency alerts on her tablet. Subject designation Alpha 7 is having another episode. Luna felt her heart clench as she sensed the anguish radiating from the lower levels. The being in distress wasn't just experiencing trauma, they were drowning in it, their pain so intense it was beginning to affect the supernatural fabric of the facility itself. I can help, Luna said urgently. Let me reach them empathically. Absolutely not, Dr. Voss interrupted. Alpha 7 is classified as extremely dangerous. We've lost 3 researchers to psychic feedback from his episodes. But Luna was already moving, her healer's instincts overriding caution and protocol. She pushed past the dampening field's constraints, extending her empathic abilities toward the source of supernatural anguish 5 levels below. The moment her power touched the traumatized being's consciousness, Luna understood why the researchers had been unable to help. Alpha 7 wasn't just experiencing trauma, he was trapped in it, reliving the same moment of catastrophic loss over and over again with perfect, devastating clarity. Through the empathic connection, Luna saw flashes of his memories, an alpha wolf watching his entire pack burn, children screaming, the smell of smoke and silver and death. But unlike normal traumatic memories that faded with time, these visions had been artificially enhanced, kept fresh and vivid by some form of supernatural torture. He's been modified, Luna gasped, her empathic senses recoiling from the unnatural intensity of Alpha 7's suffering. Someone has used mystical enhancement to prevent his trauma from healing naturally. Dr. Voss stepped closer, her scientific fascination overriding concern for Luna's well-being. What do you mean, modified? Mystical binding on his psyche, designed to keep wounds fresh and accessible, Luna explained, her voice shaking with outrage. This isn't therapeutic research. This is torture. The alarms continued to blare as Alpha 7's anguish reached critical levels, his supernatural breakdown beginning to affect the facility's structural integrity. Luna could feel cracks spreading through the mystical barriers that contain the most dangerous research subjects. Dr. Voss, one of the technicians, called out urgently, "We're reading cascade failure in the sublevel 5 containment systems. If Alpha 7's episode continues, We could lose containment on all subjects. Luna made a decision that would change everything. Instead of withdrawing her empathic connection, she pushed deeper, extending her abilities beyond the dampening fields and down through 5 levels of reinforced concrete and mystical barriers. Luna, don't. David started to warn her, but it was too late. Luna's consciousness expanded through the facility, like water flowing through cracks, her empathic senses touching every supernatural being held in the Council's research wings. What she found was a catalog of horrors, dozens of individuals who had been subjected to experiments designed to understand and weaponize supernatural trauma. But Luna wasn't just observing their pain, she was beginning to heal it. Her power flowed through the facility's supernatural infrastructure, carrying empathic healing to every damaged psyche she encountered. Rogue wolves who had been driven insane by isolation suddenly remembered what pack bonds felt like. Exiled shifters who had lost their connection to their animal forms began to sense their other selves stirring. Supernatural beings who had been broken by rejection and abandonment felt the first stirrings of hope they'd experienced in years. Impossible, Dr. Voss breathed, watching her monitoring equipment register empathic activity throughout the entire facility. She's healing all of them simultaneously. On sublevel 5, Alpha 7's breakdown began to subside as Luna's power carefully untangled the mystical bindings that had been keeping his trauma artificially fresh. For the first time in what Luna sensed had been years, he began to remember moments from his life beyond the night his pack died. But the effort was enormous, and Luna felt herself beginning to burn out from the sheer scope of what she was attempting. Healing one traumatized individual was challenging enough. Trying to reach dozens simultaneously was pushing her abilities beyond their safe limits. "Stop," Dr. Voss commanded, but Luna could barely hear her over the psychic static of so many healing connections. Through her empathic network, Luna became aware of movement throughout the facility. The supernatural beings she was healing were beginning to respond to her presence, some of them attempting to break out of their containment to reach the source of the healing energy. "Security breach on multiple levels," a voice announced over the facility's intercom system. "All research subjects are showing elevated supernatural activity. Initiating full lockdown procedures." Luna felt the dampening fields throughout the facility spike to maximum power, trying to suppress the supernatural awakening she had accidentally triggered. But her empathic connections had grown too strong, too widespread to be easily contained. "You have to stop," Dr. Voss said urgently, now sounding genuinely frightened. "If you don't withdraw your abilities, the feedback could kill you." But Luna had touched something in the depths of the facility that made her empathic senses recoil in horror. Below even the research levels, in spaces that didn't appear on any official blueprints, she sensed supernatural beings who had been so thoroughly broken by the Council's experiments that they barely qualified as sentient anymore. "What have you done?" Luna whispered, her voice carrying such empathic weight that everyone in the evaluation suite felt her revulsion as a physical force. Dr. Voss's professional composure finally cracked, revealing the guilt and moral conflict that had been eating away at her for years. "We study supernatural psychology to protect human and supernatural populations alike. Sometimes that research requires difficult choices." Luna's empathic abilities suddenly exploded outward with uncontrolled fury, her power carrying the accumulated anguish of every supernatural being who had suffered in the Council's facilities. The dampening field shattered like glass, emergency systems failed throughout the complex, and somewhere far above them, Luna felt Kai's roar of alpha rage as he sensed his mate's distress through their suddenly unobstructed bond. The last thing Luna saw before her consciousness scattered across the empathic network she had created was Dr. Voss reaching for an emergency device that would either save or destroy them all. The moment the dampening fields collapsed, Kai felt Luna's distress crash through their mate bond like a tidal wave of anguish and fury. Her empathic abilities were burning white-hot with uncontrolled power, touching dozens of traumatized supernatural beings simultaneously and absorbing their accumulated pain faster than her psyche could process it. Kai exploded from the visitors' waiting area with a roar that shattered every piece of glass on sublevel 1. His alpha presence filled the corridor like a living thing, demanding immediate submission from every supernatural being in the vicinity. Emergency lighting flickered as his rage interfered with the facility's electrical systems. "Where is she?" he snarled at the first council enforcer unfortunate enough to cross his path. The enforcer, a beta werewolf who probably outweighed Kai by 50 pounds, took one look at the alpha's gold-blazing eyes and immediately submitted, his wolf recognizing a predator operating on a level beyond normal pack politics. Sublevel 3. Evaluation Suite 7. The enforcer gasped, pressing himself against the wall as Kai's fury made the air itself feel dangerous. "But sir, the facility is in full lockdown. No one is authorized." Kai's response was to shift partially, his human form taking on the enhanced strength and speed of his wolf without fully transforming. Claws extended from his fingertips as he tore through the security door leading to the emergency stairwell, the reinforced steel parting like tissue paper under his supernatural strength. 2 levels down, he encountered a squad of council enforcers in full tactical gear, their silver-loaded weapons trained on the stairwell in anticipation of his arrival. Alpha Blackthorne, their squad leader, called out with professional authority, "Stand down immediately. The facility is under emergency containment protocols. Any interference with security procedures will be considered an act of war against the Supernatural Council." Kai's response was a laugh that held no humor whatsoever. "You want to see what war looks like?" His alpha presence expanded outward like a shockwave, carrying with it the supernatural authority of a territorial leader whose mate was in mortal danger. The enforcers' weapons began to shake in their hands as their wolves instinctively responded to dominance that operated on a primal level beyond their conscious control. "Stand aside," Kai commanded, his voice carrying harmonics that made the concrete walls vibrate. "Now." One by one, the enforcers stepped away from the stairwell entrance, their professional training warring with supernatural instincts that recognized Kai as something beyond their ability to contain. Their squad leader tried to maintain his position, but when Kai's eyes met his, the beta wolf's resistance crumbled like a dam bursting. Kai reached sublevel 3 to find chaos spreading through the research levels. Emergency alarms were blaring, supernatural containment systems were failing throughout the facility, and through his bond with Luna, he could feel her consciousness scattered across an empathic network that included dozens of traumatized individuals. The door to Evaluation Suite 7 had been sealed with emergency barriers, but Kai's claws made short work of the mystical reinforcement. He burst into the sterile white room to find Luna, collapsed in the examination chair, her body convulsing as empathic overload threatened to tear her consciousness apart. Dr. Helena Voss stood over Luna with some kind of mystical device, her face showing a mixture of scientific fascination and genuine terror. "Alpha Blackthorne, thank goodness. She's experiencing critical empathic feedback. If we don't sever her connections immediately, the psychic strain could kill her." Kai moved to Luna's side with supernatural speed, gathering her convulsing form against his chest. The moment their skin made contact, he felt the full scope of what she was experiencing. Her consciousness spread across the facility like a spider's web, touching every supernatural being held in the Council's research wings. Through her empathic connections, Kai experienced flashes of the horrors she had discovered. Supernatural beings subjected to psychological torture disguised as research, mystical experiments designed to weaponize trauma and isolation, individuals who had been so thoroughly broken that they barely remembered what it felt like to be whole. "What have you done to them?" Kai demanded, his voice carrying such alpha authority that Dr. Voss involuntarily stepped backward. "Essential research," Dr. Voss replied, though her voice shook with the weight of accumulated guilt. "Understanding supernatural psychology requires controlled observation of trauma responses. The Council has approved torture," Kai snarled, his protective fury building to dangerous levels. "And now my mate is dying because she tried to heal what you've spent years destroying." Through the facility's intercom system, voices were announcing multiple security breaches as the supernatural beings Luna had touched began responding to her healing presence. Somewhere on sublevel 5, Kai could hear the sound of mystical barriers failing as Alpha 7, whoever that was, finally broke free of whatever containment had been holding him. "We need to get her out of here," Kai said, lifting Luna's trembling form from the examination chair. The empathic feedback is getting worse. You can't move her, Dr. Voss protested. Her consciousness is distributed across the entire facility. Physical relocation could sever the connections traumatically and cause permanent psychological damage. Kai looked down at Luna's face, seeing the pain etched in every line as she fought to maintain empathic contact with dozens of suffering individuals. Through their mate bond, he could feel her determination to complete what she had started, to bring healing to every supernatural being trapped in the Council's research programs. Then we bring the facility to her, Kai said grimly. He extended his alpha presence throughout the building, calling to every supernatural being within range with a command that transcended species and territorial boundaries. His voice carried through the mystical infrastructure of the complex, reaching wolves and vampires and fae and beings whose nature Kai couldn't immediately identify. Pack brothers, Kai called, his supernatural authority making the words echo through dimensions beyond the physical. Your healer calls to you. Come to her. Come now. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Throughout the council facility, supernatural beings began moving towards sublevel 3 with single-minded determination. Security barriers that had contained them for months or years crumbled under the combined pressure of dozens of individuals responding to alpha command backed by empathic healing. This is madness, Dr. Voss said, watching her monitoring equipment register supernatural activity beyond anything the facility had been designed to contain. You're going to bring down the entire complex. Good, Kai replied without hesitation. This place is an abomination. The first of Luna's empathic connections arrived within minutes, a young wolf who moved with the careful control of someone whose supernatural identity had been deliberately damaged. Behind him came others, a vampire whose eyes held the hollow look of someone whose emotional connections had been severed, a fae whose natural magic had been bound and twisted for research purposes, dozens of individuals who bore the psychological scars of the Council's essential research. But instead of the chaos Dr. Voss had expected, something remarkable happened. As each supernatural being entered the evaluation suite, Luna's empathic network began to stabilize. The scattered fragments of her consciousness had anchors now, focal points that helped her maintain coherent awareness across the healing connections. Impossible, Dr. Voss breathed, watching her instruments register something unprecedented. She's using them as empathic relays, distributing the psychic load across multiple consciousness nodes. The young wolf, David, Kai realized from Luna's memories, knelt beside the examination chair and placed his hand on Luna's arm. Immediately, some of the strain faded from her face as the empathic network found a more sustainable configuration. We can feel her, David said wonderingly. All of us. She's showing us how to share the pain instead of carrying it alone. More supernatural beings continued to arrive, each one adding stability to Luna's empathic web. But Kai could sense movement throughout the facility that had nothing to do with Luna's healing network. Council security forces were mobilizing, preparing to retake control of the research levels by whatever means necessary. Alpha Blackthorne, a familiar voice called from the corridor outside. Agent Morrison appeared in the doorway, his weapon lowered, but his expression grim, with professional duty. I need you to know that Council leadership has classified the situation as a full supernatural emergency. They're authorizing lethal force to regain containment. Kai felt his protective fury spike to dangerous levels. Let them try. Sir, Morrison continued, his voice carrying genuine respect despite the circumstances, I saw what Dr. Ashworth accomplished at the healing grounds. I felt the connection she created, the understanding between enemies. But this is going to be seen as an act of war against supernatural authority. Through his bond with Luna, Kai could feel her consciousness beginning to coalesce as the empathic network found its optimal configuration. Her eyes fluttered open, focusing on his face with effort. Kai, she whispered, her voice hoarse from empathic strain. They've been torturing them. For years. Keeping trauma fresh, preventing healing, studying supernatural breakdown like it's just another research project. I know, Kai said softly, his thumb brushing across her cheek. I felt it through our bond. Luna struggled to sit up, her empathic senses now stable enough to function without causing her physical collapse. Around the evaluation suite, the supernatural beings she had healed watched her with expressions of wonder and gratitude. We have to get them out, Luna said, her voice growing stronger as she drew strength from the empathic connections surrounding her. All of them. The Council will never let them go willingly. Dr. Ashworth, Agent Morrison said carefully, what you're suggesting would require fighting through multiple levels of Council security and magical containment. Even if you could reach the most restricted areas, the psychological damage to some of the long-term subjects will be worse if we leave them here, Luna finished firmly. She looked around the room at the faces of supernatural beings who had found hope for the first time in years. This isn't research. This isn't protection. This is systematic torture disguised as scientific inquiry. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the corridor outside. Heavy boots, multiple personnel, the jingle of equipment that suggested serious combat readiness. Council Strike Team, Morrison said grimly. Elite enforcers with authorization to use whatever force necessary to restore containment. Kai moved to stand between Luna and the doorway, his alpha presence filling the space like a tangible shield. Around the room, the supernatural beings Luna had healed began to shift and change, their empathic connections allowing them to coordinate their supernatural abilities in ways that transcended individual species limitations. Dr. Ashworth, the strike team leader's voice boomed through a mystical amplification system. You have 60 seconds to cease all empathic activity and submit to immediate containment. Any resistance will be met with overwhelming force. Luna stood slowly, drawing strength from the empathic network that now connected her to dozens of supernatural beings throughout the facility. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone who had touched the souls of the broken and found them worthy of healing. No, Luna said simply. We're leaving. All of us. And anyone who tries to stop us will discover exactly what a packbinder is truly capable of. The empathic network pulsed with unified determination as Luna prepared to lead the largest supernatural prison break in Council history. The Council Strike Team moved with military precision through the corridors of Sublevel 3, their mystical armor gleaming with protective enchantments and their weapons humming with enough supernatural firepower to level a city block. Luna could feel their approach through her empathic network like an approaching storm front, all cold determination and professional readiness to kill. Breach in 30 seconds, the strike team leader announced through the facility's communication system. All research personnel evacuate to safe zones immediately. Dr. Voss looked between Luna and the assembled supernatural beings with growing panic. This is madness. You can't fight the Council's elite forces. They have mystical weapons designed specifically to counter supernatural abilities. Luna felt the empathic network pulse with shared resolve as dozens of consciousness nodes aligned their intentions. Through her connections, she could sense supernatural beings throughout the facility, some still trapped in containment, others making their way towards Sublevel 3 in response to Kai's alpha call. We're not going to fight them, Luna said calmly, her voice carrying an authority that made everyone in the room focus on her completely. We're going to show them what they've really been doing here. She extended her empathic abilities throughout the facility, touching every consciousness within range, not just the supernatural beings who had been imprisoned for research, but the Council personnel, the security guards, the researchers who had convinced themselves that their work served a greater good. Luna, what are you doing? Kai asked, sensing the massive expansion of her power through their mate bond. Creating understanding, Luna replied, her empathic network spreading like wildfire through the facility's mystical infrastructure. The same thing I did at the healing grounds, but on a larger scale. The strike team reached the evaluation suite just as Luna's abilities achieved complete penetration of the facility's supernatural awareness. The breach charges they'd prepared to blow through the reinforced door suddenly seemed unnecessary as every person in the complex, human and supernatural alike, began experiencing empathic connection on a level that transcended individual consciousness. Through Luna's network, the The strike team leader suddenly felt what it was like to be Alpha 7, trapped in endless loops of traumatic memory with no hope of healing. The weapons specialist experienced the slow psychological erosion that came from years of mystical experimentation. The tactical coordinator felt the crushing despair of supernatural beings who had been deliberately broken and kept broken for research purposes. But Luna didn't stop with sharing trauma. She also projected the healing that was possible, the connections that could be rebuilt, the hope that existed even in the darkest psychological wounds. Every person touched by her empathic network experienced both the horror of what the Council had done and the possibility of redemption through understanding and connection. "Stand down," the strike team leader said suddenly, his voice carrying over the communication system with obvious confusion. "Stand down immediately." Through the facility's security cameras, Luna could see Council personnel throughout the complex stopping in their tracks as empathic understanding crashed through their consciousness like a tidal wave. Researchers who had spent years justifying psychological torture suddenly felt the full weight of their victims' suffering. Security guards who had convinced themselves they were protecting society experienced the crushing isolation of supernatural beings denied basic empathic connection. "What's happening to them?" Dr. Voss asked, watching her monitoring equipment register empathic activity that exceeded every scale the facility had been designed to measure. "They're feeling what we feel," David answered, his voice filled with wonder at experiencing true empathic connection for the first time since his exile. "All of it. The pain, the healing, the possibility of something better." Agent Morrison appeared in the doorway, but instead of the professional detachment Luna had grown accustomed to, his face showed raw emotion, grief, guilt, and a desperate hope that maybe the damage could be undone. "Dr. Ashworth," Morrison said, his voice shaking with the weight of empathic revelation, "I felt it. All of it. What we've been doing here, what the Council has authorized in the name of supernatural security, it's monstrous." Luna nodded, maintaining her empathic connections throughout the facility while drawing strength from Kai's unwavering support through their mate bond. "Agent Morrison, how many supernatural beings are being held in this facility?" 47 in the research wings," Morrison replied without hesitation, his professional conditioning warring with newfound empathic awareness. "Another 12 in the maximum security containment area on sublevel 7. "And how many of them volunteered for this research?" Morrison's face crumpled as the implications of Luna's question crashed through his consciousness. "None of them. They were all classified as security risks or exile cases, or individuals whose supernatural abilities posed potential threats to social stability." Through her empathic network, Luna could feel the guilt and horror spreading through the facility's personnel as they confronted the reality of what they had been participating in. Years of rationalization and bureaucratic justification crumbled in the face of direct empathic experience of their victims' suffering. "The containment systems are failing throughout the facility," Dr. Voss reported, though her voice had lost its clinical detachment. "Your empathic network is interfering with the mystical barriers that keep the most dangerous subjects contained." "Good," Luna said firmly. "Because the most dangerous thing in this facility isn't the supernatural beings you've been torturing. It's the system that convinced good people that torture was acceptable in the name of security." Alarms began blaring throughout the complex as mystical containment systems collapsed under the pressure of empathic awakening. But instead of the chaos and violence that the Council's protocols anticipated, something unprecedented happened. The supernatural beings emerging from containment moved with calm purpose, guided by their connection to Luna's empathic network. Instead of seeking revenge against their captors, they began reaching out to the facility's personnel with the same healing energy that Luna had shown them. On sublevel 7, Alpha 7, whose real name, Luna learned through empathic connection, was Marcus Stormwind, broke free of mystical restraints that had held him for 3 years. But instead of the berserker rage the security protocols expected, he moved through the facility with careful control, his empathic connection to Luna helping him distinguish between enemies and people who had been trapped in a system beyond their understanding. "This is impossible," Dr. Voss whispered, watching her instruments register healing activity throughout areas that should have been experiencing violent conflict. they should be seeking revenge, attacking their captors. Every psychological model predicts. Your models are based on the assumption that supernatural beings are fundamentally violent and need to be controlled, Luna interrupted. But what if that's only true when they're isolated, traumatized, and denied empathic connection? Through the facility's communication system, reports began filtering in from throughout the complex. Instead of the expected bloodbath, council personnel were describing supernatural beings who were actually helping with evacuations, assisting injured researchers, and providing empathic support to security guards who were experiencing psychological trauma from their sudden awareness of what they had been participating in. Dr. Ashworth, Agent Morrison said urgently, "Council leadership is monitoring the situation from the surface. They're threatening to activate the facility's emergency protocols." Luna felt a chill run through her empathic network as she sensed what Morrison wasn't saying aloud. Emergency protocols that would involve sealing the entire complex and eliminating everyone inside, supernatural beings and personnel alike, rather than risk the exposure of the Council's research programs. "How long do we have?" Kai asked, his alpha instincts immediately assessing the tactical situation. "Maybe 20 minutes before they decide the situation is unsalvageable," Morrison replied grimly. "The Council has contingency plans for containing empathic outbreaks that pose existential threats to supernatural secrecy." Luna closed her eyes, extending her empathic awareness as far as possible throughout the facility and beyond. Through her network, she could sense the Council leadership team on the surface, their emotions a mixture of fear, anger, and cold calculation. They were preparing to sacrifice everyone in the complex to maintain the secrecy of their research programs. But Luna could also sense something else. Supernatural beings throughout the Denver area who were beginning to respond to the empathic awakening radiating from the Council facility. Pack wolves whose territorial instincts were drawing them toward the source of supernatural distress. Lone wolves who felt the call of empathic connection for the first time in years. Even humans with latent supernatural sensitivity were beginning to notice that something unprecedented was happening in the mountains above the city. "We're not just breaking out of this facility," Luna said suddenly, understanding flooding through her as her empathic awareness expanded beyond the complex. "We're starting something that can't be stopped." She reached out through her network to touch every supernatural being within a 50-mile radius, projecting the healing and connection she had discovered beneath the heart tree. The response was immediate and overwhelming, hundreds of supernatural consciousness nodes suddenly aligning with her empathic network, creating a web of connection that spanned multiple territories and species boundaries. "Luna," Kai said urgently, sensing the massive expansion of her abilities through their mate bond, "you're going to burn out. No one can maintain empathic connection on that scale." But Luna was no longer maintaining the network alone. Every supernatural being she touched became a node, a relay point that helped distribute the empathic load across hundreds of individual consciousness streams. The network was becoming self-sustaining, powered by the collective will of supernatural beings who had forgotten what true connection felt like. "The surface teams are moving," Morrison reported, monitoring Council communications through his enforcement channels. "They're implementing Protocol 7, total facility sterilization." Luna felt the empathic network pulse with unified determination as hundreds of supernatural beings throughout the region began converging on the Council facility. This wasn't just a prison break anymore. It was the beginning of a supernatural revolution based on empathic connection rather than territorial dominance. "Everyone who can walk, we're leaving," Luna announced said, her voice carrying through the facility's communication system via empathic projection. "Those who need assistance, we carry. No one gets left behind." As supernatural beings throughout the facility began moving with coordinated purpose, Luna felt the first tremors of the Council's emergency protocols activating. Deep beneath the complex, mystical charges were being armed, enough supernatural explosive power to collapse the entire mountain, if necessary. But the empathic network Luna had created was now beyond any single individual's control, powered by the collective will of hundreds of supernatural beings who refused to let fear and isolation rule their lives any longer. The revolution had begun. The council facility's emergency evacuation was unlike anything in supernatural history. Instead of the chaos and violence that Protocol 7 was designed to contain, the corridors filled with an almost surreal calm as supernatural beings moved with coordinated purpose through Luna's empathic network. Marcus Stormwind, the former Alpha 7, emerged from the maximum security levels carrying a vampire whose legs had been shattered during mystical experimentation. His emotional signature, once a howling vortex of trauma and rage, now resonated with protective determination channeled through empathic connection. How many more? Luna asked as Marcus gently set the injured vampire on a makeshift stretcher that other freed captives had constructed from medical equipment. 12 on sublevel 7, 8 more in the isolation chambers, Marcus replied, his voice rough from disuse, but carrying the authority of someone who had rediscovered his purpose. Some of them have been here so long they don't remember what it feels like to hope. Through her empathic network, Luna could sense the supernatural beings Marcus described. Consciousness nodes so damaged by years of psychological torture that they barely registered as sentient. The Council's researchers had pushed some subjects beyond the point where normal healing could reach them. "We get them out first," Luna said firmly, drawing strength from Kai's unwavering support through their mate bond. No matter what state they're in, they deserve the chance to remember what connection feels like. Dr. Voss approached hesitantly, her professional composure completely shattered by the empathic revelations she'd experienced. "Dr. Ashworth, some of the subjects in deep isolation, the psychological damage may be irreversible. Moving them could cause complete cognitive collapse." Luna turned to face the researcher, her empathic senses reading the complex mixture of guilt, fear, and desperate hope in Dr. Voss's emotional signature. 3 hours ago, you would have said David's pack bond trauma was irreversible. You would have said Marcus was too far gone to ever function as anything but a research subject. She gestured toward the supernatural beings moving through the facility with calm efficiency, helping evacuate council personnel alongside their fellow captives. Empathic healing doesn't follow the rules your research established because your research was based on keeping beings isolated and broken. Agent Morrison's voice crackled through the communication system. Surface teams report massive supernatural convergence on the facility perimeter. We've got pack wolves from 6 different territories, lone wolves, urban supernaturals, even some fae from the mountain territories. Dr. Ashworth, your empathic network is calling in every supernatural being within a 100-mile radius. Through her expanded awareness, Luna could indeed sense the gathering supernatural army responding to her call. But unlike traditional pack mobilizations based on territorial dominance and alpha authority, this convergence was driven by empathic connection and shared purpose. "They're not coming to fight," Luna said, her voice carrying through the facility's speakers via empathic projection. "They're coming to witness the birth of something new, a supernatural community based on healing rather than dominance." Kai moved to Luna's side, his alpha presence providing an anchor point for her rapidly expanding abilities. Through their mate bond, she could feel his awe at the scope of what she was accomplishing, but also his concern for the toll it was taking on her. "Luna, the empathic load you're carrying, maintaining connection with this many consciousness nodes, it's beyond what any pack binder in history has attempted," Kai said quietly. "You need to start delegating, creating secondary network hubs before you burn out completely." Luna nodded, understanding the wisdom in his words. She reached out through her empathic connections, identifying the strongest and most stable consciousness nodes within her network. "David," she called to the young exile who had been her first successful healing in the facility. "Marcus." "Sarah." She touched the mind of a fae who had maintained her sanity through 3 years of mystical experimentation. "I need you to become network anchors. Take on some of the empathic load, help me distribute the connections more sustainably." The 3 supernatural beings she'd named immediately understood what she was asking. Drawing on techniques that seemed to flow from ancestral memory, they began accepting portions of Luna's empathic network, becoming secondary hubs that helped coordinate the healing and evacuation efforts. "Remarkable," Dr. Voss breathed, watching her instruments register the network's evolution from single-point control to distributed empathic consciousness. You're creating a collective supernatural awareness that transcends individual species boundaries. But their moment of wonder was interrupted by the facility's speakers crackling to life with an announcement that sent chills through everyone present. Attention all personnel and subjects. The voice was cold, authoritative, carrying the supernatural weight of council leadership. This is Director Catherine Blackwater, North American Supernatural Council. The situation in Research Facility 7 has been classified as an existential threat to supernatural secrecy and human-supernatural relations. Luna felt the empathic network pulse with unified attention as hundreds of consciousness nodes focused on the announcement. Dr. Luna Ashworth, Director Blackwater continued, "You have demonstrated abilities that exceed safe parameters for uncontrolled supernatural entities. Your empathic network poses an unacceptable risk to the established order that has maintained peace between supernatural and human populations for centuries." Through the facility's security cameras, Luna could see council forces massing on the surface, not just enforcers, but council mages with the authority to reshape reality itself, and even representatives from other supernatural species who viewed the empathic awakening as a threat to their own power structures. "You have exactly 10 minutes to cease all empathic activity and submit to immediate containment," Director Blackwater announced. "Failure to comply will result in the implementation of Protocol Zero, complete mystical sterilization of the facility and surrounding area." The threat hit Luna's empathic network like a physical blow. Protocol Zero wasn't just about destroying the facility. It was about erasing every trace of supernatural presence from a 50-square-mile area, including the hundreds of supernatural beings who were converging to support the empathic awakening. "They're willing to commit genocide to maintain their control," Marcus said grimly, his empathic connection carrying the weight of someone who had experienced the Council's ruthlessness firsthand. But Luna felt something else through her network, a surge of determination from the supernatural beings gathering on the surface. They had felt the empathic connection she offered, experienced the possibility of a world where supernatural beings weren't isolated by fear and territorial boundaries. They weren't going to let the Council destroy that hope without a fight. "Agent Morrison," Luna called through the facility's communication system. "What's the tactical situation on the surface?" Morrison's response came through his enforcement channels, his voice tight with professional concern. "Council forces are heavily armed with mystical weapons, but they're facing a supernatural coalition unlike anything in recorded history. We've got representatives from species that haven't cooperated in centuries, all unified by their connection to your empathic network." Through her expanded awareness, Luna could sense the gathering supernatural army, not just wolves and vampires and fae, but beings whose nature defied easy classification. Urban shamans whose magic drew power from city energy. Elemental spirits who rarely involve themselves in supernatural politics. Even some dragons whose ancient wisdom had been awakened by the possibility of true empathic connection. "Director Blackwater is scared," Luna said suddenly, her empathic senses reading the emotions of the Council leadership through the facility's mystical infrastructure. "Not just of what I can do, but of what this represents. If supernatural beings can connect empathically across species and territorial boundaries, traditional power structures become obsolete." Kai's expression sharpened with understanding. "This isn't just about containing a dangerous individual. It's about preventing a fundamental shift in how supernatural society operates." "Which is exactly why we can't let them stop it," Luna replied, her voice carrying absolute conviction. "Too many supernatural beings have lived in isolation, convinced they were broken or dangerous or unworthy of connection. The empathic network shows them a different possibility." She reached out through her network to touch every supernatural consciousness within range, projecting a message that transcended species boundaries. "The choice is ours," Luna said, her empathic voice carrying to hundreds of supernatural beings throughout the region. "We can return to the old ways, territorial disputes, species isolation, power structures based on dominance and fear. Or we can choose something new, a community based on empathic connection, healing, and shared understanding." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Through her network, Luna felt the unified resolve of supernatural beings who refused to go back to lives of isolation and artificial scarcity. The empathic awakening had shown them what connection felt like, and they were willing to fight to protect it. Protocol Zero activation in 7 minutes, Director Blackwater announced, her voice showing the first cracks in its authoritative calm. All personnel not essential to mystical sterilization procedures evacuate to minimum safe distance immediately. But Luna was no longer listening to the Council's threats. Through her empathic network, she was coordinating the largest supernatural mobilization in recorded history, not for conquest or territorial expansion, but for the right to maintain empathic connection across species boundaries. Everyone ready? Luna asked, drawing on the collective strength of hundreds of consciousness nodes to prepare for what was about to become the defining moment in supernatural history. The empathic network pulsed with unified determination as Luna prepared to lead a revolution that would either transform supernatural society forever or die trying. The surface of the Rocky Mountains had become a supernatural battlefield unlike anything in recorded history, but not in the way the Council had expected. Instead of the chaotic violence that Protocol Zero was designed to contain, the gathered supernatural beings moved with coordinated purpose through Luna's empathic network, their actions guided by shared understanding rather than territorial instinct. Luna emerged from the facility's main entrance to find herself in the center of a gathering that defied every assumption about supernatural society. Pack wolves stood alongside vampires who had been enemies for centuries. Urban shamans shared mystical energy with mountain fae. Dragons, actual dragons, perched on rocky outcroppings, their ancient eyes fixed on Luna with expressions of curious hope. Impossible, Director Catherine Blackwater said from her position behind heavily warded council barriers. She was a tall woman with silver hair and eyes that held the cold calculation of someone accustomed to absolute authority. Supernatural species don't cooperate on this scale. Territorial instincts, species barriers, evolutionary competition, they make sustained alliance impossible. But Luna's empathic network was proving every council assumption wrong. Through hundreds of consciousness nodes, she could feel the wonder of supernatural beings who were experiencing true community for the first time in their lives. Wolves whose pack bonds had been severed by exile found new connections with vampires who understood isolation. Fae whose elemental magic had been bound by urban pollution discovered kinship with shamans who channeled city energy. Dr. Ashworth, Director Blackwater called out, her voice amplified by mystical authority, "You have 3 minutes to disperse this gathering and submit to council jurisdiction. What you've created here is an existential threat to the balance that has kept supernatural society stable for centuries." Luna stepped forward, drawing strength from Kai's protective presence at her side and the empathic support of hundreds of supernatural beings. When she spoke, her voice carried through the network to every consciousness node, creating a chorus of unified response. "Director Blackwater," Luna said, her words resonating with empathic weight, "the only threat here is to power structures that depend on keeping supernatural beings isolated and afraid." Through her network, Luna projected a vision of what she had seen in the Council's research facility, not just the torture and psychological experimentation, but the underlying assumption that supernatural beings were inherently dangerous and needed to be controlled through fear and separation. "You've convinced yourselves that we're monsters who need to be contained," Luna continued, her empathic voice touching every person present, council forces included. "But what if the real monster is a system that turns healing into a crime and connection into a threat?" Director Blackwater's composure began to crack as Luna's empathic projection reached even the heavily warded council positions. For the first time in decades, the director found herself experiencing the emotions of the supernatural beings she had spent her career controlling and containing. The research was necessary, Director Blackwater said, but her voice carried less conviction than before. Supernatural abilities pose genuine risks to human populations. Empathic manipulation, mystical coercion, the potential for supernatural beings to influence human consciousness. "Like this?" Luna interrupted, extending her empathic abilities to touch every human mind within range. But instead of the invasive mental control that the Council feared, Luna's touch carried understanding and choice. Every human who felt her empathic presence, Council personnel, mountain rescue workers, even curious hikers who had been drawn to the supernatural gathering, experienced a moment of perfect clarity about what was really happening. They felt the pain of supernatural beings who had been tortured in the name of human protection. They experienced the joy of empathic connection that transcended species boundaries. Most importantly, they understood that they had a choice: to support a system based on fear and control, or to embrace the possibility of genuine understanding between human and supernatural populations. "She's not controlling them," Agent Morrison said wonderingly, his voice carrying clearly across the supernatural gathering. "She's offering them the truth and letting them choose for themselves." The human personnel within Luna's empathic range began lowering their weapons, their faces showing the dawning realization that they had been protecting a system that betrayed everything they thought they were fighting for. Protocol Zero activation in 60 seconds, Director Blackwater announced desperately, but her mystical authority was beginning to fail as her own forces experienced empathic awakening. Luna felt the massive mystical charges hidden throughout the mountain beginning to activate, supernatural explosives powerful enough to erase every trace of the empathic network she had created. But she also felt something else: the collective determination of hundreds of supernatural beings who refused to let fear triumph over connection. "Everyone together," Luna said through her network, her empathic voice reaching every consciousness node simultaneously. "Not to fight, but to show them what we're really capable of when we work together." The response was immediate and breathtaking. Every supernatural being within Luna's network began channeling their abilities not toward violence or destruction, but toward healing and protection. Wolves whose strength had been shaped by territorial battles instead created barriers to protect the more vulnerable. Vampires whose speed had been used for predation instead evacuated injured Council personnel to safety. Dragons whose fire had inspired terror for millennia instead created warming light for supernatural beings whose bodies were failing from years of captivity. But most remarkably, they began extending that protection to the very Council forces who had been prepared to destroy them. Instead of seeking revenge against their oppressors, the freed supernatural beings used their abilities to shield Council personnel from the mystical explosion that Director Blackwater was about to trigger. "Stop," Director Blackwater said suddenly, her hand freezing over the Protocol Zero activation switch. Through Luna's empathic projection, the Director was experiencing the absolute selflessness of supernatural beings who were willing to die to protect even their enemies. "This can't be real," Director Blackwater whispered, her authoritative composure finally cracking completely. "Supernatural beings don't sacrifice themselves for humans. The research shows." "Your research shows what happens when you isolate supernatural beings and torture them until they become the monsters you expected them to be," Luna replied gently, her empathic touch carrying compassion even for the woman who had been prepared to commit genocide moments earlier. Through her network, Luna began sharing memories, not just the trauma and isolation that the Council system had created, but the healing and connection that were possible when supernatural beings were allowed to form genuine bonds across species boundaries. Director Blackwater experienced the joy of David's reconnection with his wolf nature. She felt Marcus Stormwind's relief at finally being free from the artificial trauma loops that had tormented him for years. She saw through the eyes of supernatural beings who had rediscovered hope, purpose, and belonging through empathic connection. "I don't understand," Director Blackwater said, her voice shaking with the weight of empathic revelation. "If supernatural beings are capable of this level of selflessness and cooperation, why do we have territorial wars? Why do we have species conflicts that require Council intervention?" Luna smiled, extending her empathic touch to encompass every person present in a moment of perfect understanding. "Because you've spent centuries convincing us that we're too dangerous to trust each other," Luna replied. "But empathic connection shows us the truth. Underneath all the territorial boundaries and species differences, we want the same things: safety, belonging, the chance to be valued for who we are rather than controlled for what we might become." The Protocol Zero activation switch remained untouched as Director Blackwater stood frozen in the grip of empathic revelation. Around the mountain gathering, Council forces and supernatural beings began tentatively reaching across the barriers that had separated them for centuries. "What happens now?" Director Blackwater asked quietly, her voice carrying none of its former authority. Luna looked around at the supernatural gathering, hundreds of beings from dozens of species, all connected through empathic bonds that transcended every boundary the Council had established. "Now we build something new," Luna said, her voice carrying the promise of transformation that would reshape supernatural society forever. A community based on empathic connection rather than territorial control. A system that celebrates diversity instead of fearing it. Through her network, Luna felt the collective agreement of supernatural beings who had tasted true connection and refused to go back to lives of isolation and artificial scarcity. The revolution was no longer rising, it had arrived. 3 weeks after the confrontation at the Council facility, Luna stood in the center of what had once been the Ashwood Exile Pact's territory, watching as supernatural beings from across North America worked together to construct something unprecedented in their history, a true sanctuary city where empathic connection transcended species boundaries. The transformation had been remarkable to witness. Where once there had been carefully maintained territorial borders and species segregation, now there were collaborative communities where vampires shared night patrol duties with werewolf packs, where Fae engineers worked alongside human architects to design buildings that harmonized with both technology and natural magic, where dragons provided aerial reconnaissance while urban shamans maintained mystical communication networks. "The infrastructure reports are in," Marcus Stormwind said, approaching Luna with a tablet displaying construction progress updates. The former Alpha 7 had become her primary coordinator for sanctuary development, his experience with trauma recovery making him uniquely qualified to help other supernatural beings adapt to empathic community living. "Housing complexes for mixed-species families are ahead of schedule," Marcus continued, his voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who had rediscovered purpose after years of forced isolation. "The mystical power grid that Elena Nightweaver designed is operating at full capacity, and the empathic resonance chambers are helping newly connected individuals stabilize their supernatural abilities." Luna nodded, though her attention was partially focused on the empathic network that now connected nearly 2,000 supernatural beings across the sanctuary territory. The constant flow of emotions, thoughts, and shared experiences had initially been overwhelming, but with practice and the help of secondary network anchors like Marcus and David, she had learned to manage the connections without losing herself in the collective consciousness. "Any word from the Council?" Luna asked, though she already knew the answer through her empathic connections with the diplomatic team. "Director Blackwater and her reform committee are requesting another meeting," Marcus replied. "They want to discuss formal recognition of the sanctuary territories and establishing protocols for supernatural beings who want to transition from traditional pack structures to empathic communities." The past 3 weeks had seen unprecedented changes throughout supernatural society. Luna's demonstration of empathic networking had inspired similar experiments across North America as supernatural beings who had felt isolated and disconnected began reaching out to form new types of communities. The Council, faced with a fundamental shift in how supernatural society operated, had been forced to choose between adaptation and irrelevance. "Director Blackwater has changed," Luna mused, remembering the empathic connection she had shared with the former Council hardliner. The experience of feeling genuine empathic community, of understanding what we were really trying to build instead of just fearing what we might destroy, it opened her mind to possibilities she'd never considered. Through her network, Luna could sense Kai's approach long before his physical presence became apparent. Their mate bond had evolved along with her empathic abilities, becoming something deeper and more complex than traditional supernatural partnerships. They shared not just emotions and physical sensations, but thoughts, memories, and dreams that blended their individual consciousness into something greater than the sum of its parts. "The territorial integration is proceeding smoothly," Kai said as he emerged from the forest path that connected the sanctuary's residential areas with the administrative center. 3 more traditional packs have requested transition assistance, and the Vancouver Vampire Covenant wants to establish an exchange program for supernatural beings interested in cross-species community living. Luna smiled at the reports, remembering how impossible such cooperation would have seemed just a month ago. The empathic network had proven that supernatural beings were capable of far more complex social organization than anyone had imagined, when they weren't artificially isolated by fear and territorial competition. There's something else, Kai continued, his expression growing more serious. Agent Morrison has been monitoring supernatural communities that haven't joined the empathic network. Some of them are concerned about what we represent. Luna felt a familiar chill run through her empathic senses. For every supernatural being who had embraced empathic connection, there were others who viewed the sanctuary territories as a threat to traditional power structures. Alpha wolves who built their authority on dominance rather than empathic leadership. Vampire elders whose control depended on maintaining hierarchical separation. Even some council hardliners who preferred the predictability of species conflict to the uncertainty of empathic cooperation. What kind of concerns? Luna asked, though her empathic senses were already picking up the answer from Kai's emotional signature. They're calling it the Packbinder threat, Kai replied grimly. The theory is that empathic networking is a form of supernatural mind control, that you're creating a hive mind that will eventually absorb all supernatural consciousness into your collective awareness. Marcus snorted with disgust. Anyone who's actually experienced the empathic network knows that's ridiculous. Connection isn't the same as control. We maintain our individual personalities, our personal boundaries, our freedom to make our own choices. But fear doesn't require logic, Luna said sadly. And there are supernatural beings whose power depends on maintaining the old systems of isolation and competition. Through her network, Luna could sense the growing tension in supernatural communities that had rejected empathic connection. Traditional pack alphas were struggling to maintain authority over wolves who had heard about empathic alternatives to dominance-based hierarchy. Vampire covens were fracturing as younger members questioned why they needed to maintain artificial separation from other supernatural species. Even some Fae courts were experiencing internal conflict as their members debated whether to embrace empathic networking or maintain their traditional mystical isolation. There's been talk of organized resistance, Kai said quietly. A coalition of traditional supernatural leaders who want to neutralize the empathic network before it spreads further. Luna felt her heart sink as she contemplated the implications. Everything they had built in the sanctuary territories, the cooperation, the healing, the genuine community that transcended species boundaries, could be destroyed by supernatural beings who preferred conflict to connection. How much time do we have? Luna asked. Agent Morrison thinks maybe 2 weeks before they move from planning to action, Kai replied. The Resistance Coalition is still trying to determine the best way to attack an empathic network without triggering the kind of supernatural uprising that could expose everything to human authorities. Luna closed her eyes, extending her empathic awareness across the sanctuary territory and beyond. Through hundreds of consciousness nodes, she could indeed sense the gathering storm. Supernatural beings whose fear of change was driving them toward violence against the very communities that offered healing and connection. They're going to try to kill me, Luna said matter-of-factly. They think if they eliminate the primary network anchor, the empathic connections will collapse and everyone will return to traditional pack structures. Like hell they will, Marcus growled, his protective instincts flaring through the empathic network. Around the sanctuary territory, Luna felt hundreds of supernatural beings responding to the perceived threat to their empathic anchor with unified determination. But Luna held up a hand, projecting calm through her network connections. Violence won't solve this. If we respond to their fear with aggression, we prove their point, that empathic networking is just another form of supernatural dominance. Then what do you suggest? Kai asked, though Luna could feel through their mate bond that he already suspected her answer. We show them what empathic connection really means, Luna said, her voice carrying the conviction that had driven her to heal tortured supernatural beings in the council facility. Not by forcing our perspective on them, but by being willing to experience theirs. Marcus looked alarmed. Luna, you're talking about extending empathic connection to supernatural beings who actively want to destroy the network. That's incredibly dangerous. Their fear and hostility could overwhelm your consciousness. Or it could help them understand that empathic networking isn't the threat they think it is, Luna countered. Marcus, you experienced the Council's artificial trauma loops for 3 years. You know better than anyone how fear can be used to maintain systems of control. Through her empathic network, Luna could feel the growing consensus among sanctuary residents, a mixture of concern for her safety and determination to support whatever approach she felt was necessary. The supernatural beings who had found healing and community through empathic connection weren't willing to see it destroyed by those who had never experienced its benefits. There's something else we need to consider, Kai said quietly. If the Resistance Coalition does attack the sanctuary territories, they won't just be targeting you. They'll be targeting every supernatural being who's chosen empathic community over traditional pack structures. Luna nodded grimly. Through her network, she could sense the vulnerability of the sanctuary residents, supernatural beings who had given up the protection of traditional territorial boundaries in favor of empathic connection. If the coalition attacked in force, the sanctuary communities would be devastated. We need allies, Luna said suddenly, understanding flooding through her as her empathic awareness expanded beyond the immediate crisis. Not just the supernatural beings who have already joined the network, but humans who understand what we're building here. Humans? Marcus asked skeptically. Luna, human-supernatural relations are complicated enough without bringing them into internal supernatural conflicts. But that's exactly the point, Luna replied, her voice growing excited as the possibilities became clear. The Resistance Coalition is operating on the assumption that supernatural society exists separately from human communities. What if we prove that empathic connection can bridge the species gap entirely? Through her network, Luna began reaching out beyond the sanctuary territories, her empathic senses touching human minds in the surrounding communities. What she found surprised her. Humans who had been unconsciously responding to the empathic resonance radiating from the sanctuary, people whose latent supernatural sensitivity had been awakened by proximity to genuine empathic connection. There are humans who can feel the network, Luna said wonderingly. Not supernatural humans, just people whose emotional awareness has been enhanced by exposure to empathic connection. They're experiencing increased empathy, better emotional regulation, stronger community bonds. Kai's expression grew thoughtful. If humans can benefit from empathic networking without becoming supernatural themselves, then we're not just creating supernatural communities, Luna finished. We're demonstrating the potential for entirely new forms of human-supernatural cooperation. Through her empathic network, Luna felt a surge of excitement from sanctuary residents as they contemplated the implications. Instead of hiding from human communities or maintaining careful separation, they could be building bridges that benefited both species. The Resistance Coalition won't expect that, Marcus said slowly. Their entire strategy is based on the assumption that we're trying to create supernatural dominance over human populations. Because that's how traditional supernatural power structures work, Luna replied. Dominance, territory, competition for limited resources. But empathic networking is based on abundance. The more beings who connect, the stronger and more stable the network becomes. Luna looked around at the sanctuary territory that had become home to so many supernatural beings who had never fit into traditional community structures. In just 3 weeks, they had built something unprecedented, not just in supernatural history, but in the history of conscious beings working together across species boundaries. We're going to need to move fast, Luna said, her empathic senses detecting the acceleration of Resistance Coalition planning. If we can demonstrate human supernatural empathic cooperation before they attack, it might give them pause. Make them reconsider whether destroying the network is really in anyone's best interest. Through her mate bond, Luna felt Kai's mixture of pride, concern, and absolute determination to support whatever path she chose. The Resistance Coalition might think they were targeting a dangerous supernatural aberration, but they were actually preparing to attack the future of conscious evolution itself. 2 weeks, Luna said, extending her empathic awareness to encompass every consciousness node within her network. We have 2 weeks to show the world what empathic connection can really accomplish. The sanctuary territory pulsed with unified purpose as nearly 2,000 supernatural beings prepared to demonstrate that cooperation was stronger than competition, that healing was more powerful than dominance, and that empathic connection could transcend every boundary that fear had created. The Riverside Community Center in the human town of Cedar Falls had never hosted a meeting quite like this one. Luna stood at the front of the packed auditorium, looking out at an audience that would have been impossible to imagine just a month ago. Humans and supernatural beings sitting side by side, their consciousness connected through empathic bonds that transcended species boundaries. Dr. Sarah Chun, Cedar Falls mayor and a psychologist who specialized in community trauma recovery, stood at the podium introducing Luna to the mixed audience. Dr. Ashworth's work in empathic healing has had measurable positive effects on our community's mental health statistics. In the 3 weeks since the sanctuary territories were established, we've seen a 40% decrease in domestic violence reports, a 60% reduction in addiction-related emergency calls, and unprecedented levels of intercommunity cooperation. Luna felt a warm surge of pride through her empathic network as the statistics validated what she had hoped might be possible. The sanctuary territories weren't just benefiting supernatural beings, they were creating positive change that radiated outward into human communities through empathic resonance. In the audience, Luna could see faces that had become familiar over the past week of community meetings. Janet Morrison, a high school counselor whose empathic sensitivity had been awakened by proximity to the sanctuary, now helped human teenagers navigate emotional trauma with techniques that paralleled supernatural healing practices. Dr. Michael Reeves, a psychiatrist who had initially been skeptical of supernatural interference in human mental health, had become one of the strongest advocates for human-supernatural therapeutic cooperation after witnessing the results firsthand. But not every face in the audience was friendly. Luna's empathic senses detected pockets of fear, suspicion, and hostility from humans who viewed supernatural presence as a threat to their community's safety and autonomy. The resistance wasn't limited to supernatural beings. There were humans who preferred the traditional separation between species, who feared that empathic connection would somehow diminish their humanity. Dr. Ashworth, Dr. Chun said, gesturing for Luna to take the podium. Would you like to explain to our community how empathic networking actually works and address some of the concerns that have been raised about supernatural influence on human consciousness? Luna stepped up to the microphone, acutely aware that her words would be transmitted not just to the humans and supernatural beings in the auditorium, but to Resistance Coalition observers who were undoubtedly monitoring the meeting for signs of the supernatural manipulation they expected to find. Thank you, Dr. Chun. Luna began, her voice carrying the calm authority that had become second nature through her role as an empathic anchor. I want to start by addressing the elephant in the room, the fear that empathic connection means supernatural beings are controlling human thoughts and emotions. She paused, extending her empathic senses to touch every consciousness in the auditorium. Instead of forcing connection, she simply offered it, like extending a hand that could be accepted or refused without consequence. Empathic connection isn't about control, Luna continued, feeling some of the tension in the room ease as people experience the gentle, non-invasive nature of her abilities. It's about understanding. When I touch your emotional awareness, I'm not changing what you feel. I'm helping you recognize and process those feelings more effectively. From the back of the auditorium, a man stood up with the aggressive posture of someone preparing for confrontation. Luna's empathic senses immediately identified him as Robert Hayes, a local businessman whose fear of supernatural presence had been amplified by Resistance Coalition propaganda. That's what you say, Hayes called out, his voice carrying clearly through the auditorium. But how do we know you're not manipulating our emotions right now? How do we know that feeling of calm isn't artificial, designed to make us more compliant? Luna nodded respectfully, recognizing the validity of his concern. Mr. Hayes, would you be willing to participate in a demonstration? I'd like to show everyone exactly what empathic connection feels like from the inside. Hayes hesitated, clearly not having expected to be invited to experience the very thing he was protesting. But the challenge in Luna's voice and the attention of the entire auditorium made refusing seem cowardly. "Fine," Hayes said, making his way to the front of the room. "But I want everyone to see if you try any supernatural mind tricks." Luna smiled gently. "Mr. Hayes, I'm going to establish an empathic connection with you, but I want you to maintain complete awareness of your own thoughts and feelings. If at any point you feel like I'm trying to control or manipulate your emotions, tell everyone immediately." She extended her hand toward Hayes, her empathic abilities reaching out to touch his consciousness with the lightest possible contact. What she found surprised her. Underneath his aggressive fear was a deep well of genuine concern for his community's well-being. Hayes wasn't hostile to supernatural beings out of prejudice. He was terrified that the people he cared about would be harmed. "I can feel it," Hayes said wonderingly, his defensive posture relaxing as he experienced empathic connection for the first time. "It's like having someone understand exactly what you're worried about without having to explain it." Through her connection with Hayes, Luna projected understanding and respect for his protective instincts, showing him that his desire to keep his community safe was shared by the supernatural beings in the sanctuary territories. "She's not controlling my thoughts," Hayes announced to the auditorium, his voice carrying surprise and growing conviction. "She's just showing me that she's worried about the same things I am. Community safety, protecting the people we care about, making sure nobody gets hurt by changes they don't understand." Luna maintained the empathic connection while addressing the auditorium. This is what empathic networking really does. It helps us recognize our shared values and common concerns, even when we come from different backgrounds or species. But as Luna spoke, her empathic senses detected a disturbance at the edge of her awareness. Through her network connections in the sanctuary territories, she felt supernatural beings responding to an approaching threat with alarm and defensive preparation. Kai's voice reached her through their mate bond, carrying urgent warning across the miles between the community center and the sanctuary. "Luna, we've got movement on the eastern perimeter. Multiple vehicles, supernatural signatures consistent with Resistance Coalition forces. They're not waiting for the 2-week timeline." Luna felt her heart skip a beat as she realized the implications. The Resistance Coalition had apparently decided that the human supernatural cooperation demonstration posed too great a threat to traditional power structures. They were attacking now, while Luna was away from the sanctuary territories and unable to coordinate empathic network defense. "Dr. Chun," Luna said quietly, her voice barely audible over the auditorium's sound system, "I need to end this meeting immediately. There's an emergency situation developing at the sanctuary territories." But before Dr. Chen could respond, the community center's lights flickered and went out, plunging the auditorium into darkness. Emergency lighting activated moments later, casting eerie shadows across the faces of humans and supernatural beings who suddenly found themselves in the middle of something far more dangerous than a community meeting. "Ladies and gentlemen," a voice announced through the building's sound system, carrying supernatural authority that made every person present freeze with instinctive recognition of predatory threat. "This is Commander Vincent Stormclaw of the Traditional Supernatural Alliance. You are now witnesses to the neutralization of a Class 5 supernatural threat." Through the auditorium's doors, figures in tactical gear entered with weapons that gleamed with mystical enhancement. Luna's empathic senses immediately identified them as supernatural beings, alpha wolves, vampire enforcers, fey warriors whose allegiance to traditional power structures outweighed any curiosity about empathic alternatives. "Dr. Luna Ashworth," Commander Stormclaw continued, his voice carrying the cold authority of someone accustomed to absolute obedience, "you will cease all empathic activity and submit to immediate containment. Your experiments in supernatural manipulation end tonight." Luna felt the empathic network pulse with alarm as hundreds of consciousness nodes throughout the sanctuary territories sensed the threat to their anchor. But she also felt something else. The human audience members in the auditorium were experiencing their own surge of protective determination. "Wait just a minute," Robert Hayes said, stepping forward with surprising courage. "Dr. Ashworth isn't manipulating anyone. I felt the empathic connection myself. It's nothing like what you're describing. Mr. Hayes, Commander Stormclaw replied with dismissive contempt. You have no understanding of supernatural psychology. The Packbinder has been conditioning your responses for weeks, making you believe that her influence is beneficial when it's actually a form of mystical slavery. But Hayes wasn't backing down. I know what manipulation feels like, he said firmly, his voice carrying across the auditorium. I've worked in business long enough to recognize when someone's trying to control my decisions. What Dr. Ashworth did was completely different. She helped me understand my own feelings more clearly. Around the auditorium, other human community members began speaking up, their voices growing stronger as they realized they were witnessing an attempt to destroy something that had brought genuine healing to their community. The sanctuary territories have made our town safer, Dr. Chin announced, her professional authority challenging the supernatural commander's assumptions. Crime is down, mental health indicators are up, and community cooperation has reached levels we've never seen before. Luna felt a surge of hope through her empathic network as she realized what was happening. The humans in the auditorium weren't just defending her, they were defending the empathic connections they had experienced, the healing and understanding that had improved their own lives. Commander Stormclaw, Luna said, her voice carrying calm authority despite the weapons trained on her, before you proceed with whatever you have planned, would you be willing to experience empathic connection yourselves? To understand what we're really building here, instead of just fearing what you think it might become. The supernatural commander's laugh was harsh and without humor. I have no interest in experiencing supernatural manipulation, Packbinder. Your empathic networking ends tonight, and traditional supernatural order will be restored. But as Commander Stormclaw spoke, Luna felt something unexpected through her empathic network, Kai's presence, growing stronger by the moment as he approached the community center with sanctuary reinforcements. More importantly, she sensed human community members throughout Cedar Falls responding to the threat with determination to protect the supernatural beings who had become their neighbors and friends. Actually, Commander, Luna said with growing confidence, I think you're about to experience something that your traditional supernatural training never prepared you for. Through her empathic network, Luna began coordinating a response that transcended every assumption about human supernatural relations. The Resistance Coalition had expected to face isolated supernatural beings defending territory. They were about to encounter something unprecedented, an integrated community where humans and supernatural beings stood together in defense of empathic connection. The revolution was about to prove that cooperation was stronger than conquest. The sound of helicopters filled the night air above Cedar Falls as the traditional Supernatural Alliance moved to implement what they called Operation Packbreak, the simultaneous elimination of Luna and the destruction of the sanctuary territories. But as Commander Stormclaw's forces prepared for what they expected to be a simple supernatural containment action, they found themselves facing something unprecedented in the history of human supernatural conflict. Luna stood in the center of the community center auditorium, her empathic network expanding to encompass not just the supernatural beings within the sanctuary territories, but the human community members who had experienced empathic connection and refused to see it destroyed. Dr. Ashworth, Robert Hayes said, moving to stand beside her despite the weapons trained in their direction. What do you need us to do? Luna felt a surge of gratitude through her empathic senses as she realized the magnitude of what Hayes was offering. A human community leader was volunteering to stand against supernatural forces in defense of empathic connection, something that challenged every assumption about species loyalty and territorial boundaries. Mr. Hayes, this could be very dangerous, Luna warned. Commander Stormclaw's forces are trained to deal with supernatural threats, not integrated community defense. Then maybe it's time they learned, Dr. Chin said, joining Hayes in the protective circle forming around Luna. This community has benefited from empathic connection. We're not going to stand by and watch it be destroyed by people who've never experienced what we've built here. Through her empathic network, Luna felt Kai's approach as he led sanctuary reinforcements through the forest paths that connected the territorial boundaries. But she also sensed something more remarkable. Human community members throughout Cedar Falls were mobilizing to protect their supernatural neighbors. Janet Morrison, the high school counselor, was coordinating student volunteers to provide communication and logistics support. Dr. Michael Reeves had contacted state authorities to report the illegal armed occupation of a civilian community center. Even the local fire department was responding to what they believed was a terrorist incident targeting community leaders. "This is impossible," Commander Stormclaw said, his tactical composure beginning to crack as his surveillance teams reported unexpected human involvement throughout the operational area. "Humans don't defend supernatural beings. They fear us, barely tolerate our presence, except council authorities specifically, because we protect them from supernatural threats." "Maybe they did before they experienced empathic connection," Luna replied, her network expanding to touch every consciousness within a 50-mile radius. "But humans who understand empathic networking aren't afraid of supernatural beings anymore. They recognize us as potential partners in building healthier communities." Through the community center's windows, Luna could see lights coming on throughout Cedar Falls as residents responded to the crisis with determination to protect their neighbors. The sight filled her with hope and terror in equal measure. If the traditional supernatural alliance responded with lethal force, human casualties could expose the supernatural world to mainstream attention in ways that would devastate both species. "Commander Stormclaw," Luna said urgently, "you need to understand what you're really attacking here. This isn't just about supernatural beings choosing empathic connection over traditional pack structures. This is about humans and supernatural beings working together to build communities that benefit everyone. Exactly the kind of dangerous integration that traditional supernatural protocols are designed to prevent," Stormclaw replied coldly. "Supernatural beings who abandon species loyalty in favor of human sympathy pose existential threats to our survival as distinct entities." But Luna's empathic senses detected something else in Stormclaw's emotional signature, fear that went beyond concern for supernatural survival. The commander was terrified that empathic networking would render traditional alpha authority obsolete, that supernatural beings with access to genuine empathic connection would no longer submit to dominance-based leadership. "You're afraid," Luna said suddenly, her empathic awareness cutting through Stormclaw's professional composure to touch the insecurity beneath. Not of what empathic networking might do to supernatural society, but of what it would mean for leaders whose authority depends on keeping their followers isolated and afraid. Stormclaw's facade of calm authority cracked for just a moment, long enough for everyone in the auditorium to see the desperate fear driving his actions. Traditional supernatural hierarchy has maintained stability for centuries. What you're offering is chaos disguised as cooperation. "Actually," a new voice said from the auditorium entrance, "what she's offering is evolution." Luna turned to see Agent Morrison entering the community center, flanked by council enforcers whose weapons were notably not pointed at supernatural beings. Behind them came Director Catherine Blackwater, her expression showing the same mixture of wonder and determination that Luna remembered from their confrontation at the council facility. "Commander Stormclaw," Director Blackwater said with official authority, "by order of the Reformed Supernatural Council, you will stand down immediately. Operation Pack Break has been classified as an illegal action against recognized sanctuary territories." Stormclaw's tactical forces looked between their commander and the council authorities with obvious confusion. The traditional supernatural alliance had expected council support for their action against empathic networking, not official opposition. "Director Blackwater," Stormclaw said, his voice tight with barely controlled rage, "the council cannot seriously be supporting supernatural integration with human populations. The security risks alone have been thoroughly evaluated," Director Blackwater interrupted. "Dr. Ashworth's empathic networking has produced measurable improvements in both supernatural and human community stability. Crime rates are down, mental health indicators are improved, and interspecies cooperation is at levels we've never recorded." Through her empathic network, Luna felt Kai's presence growing stronger as sanctuary reinforcements reached the community center's perimeter. But instead of the armed confrontation she had feared, Luna sensed something remarkable. Human community members were greeting the arriving supernatural beings as welcome allies, not threatening invaders. "The traditional supernatural order is ending, Commander," Director Blackwater continued, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had experienced empathic connection and found it transformative rather than threatening. Not because empathic networking destroys it, but because it offers something better. Communities based on understanding rather than dominance, cooperation rather than competition. Stormclaw looked around the auditorium at faces that reflected a new reality he hadn't anticipated. Humans and supernatural beings standing together, united by empathic bonds that transcended species boundaries. Council authorities, supporting integration rather than separation. His entire worldview was crumbling in real time. "This is madness," Stormclaw said desperately. Supernatural beings who abandon their essential nature, humans who welcome supernatural influence, council authorities who support the destruction of everything our society was built to protect. "Commander," Luna interrupted gently, extending her empathic abilities toward him with the same careful respect she had shown Robert Hayes. "Would you be willing to experience what empathic connection actually feels like before you decide whether it's worth destroying?" Stormclaw recoiled from her empathic touch, as if it were a physical attack. "I will not submit to supernatural manipulation." "It's not manipulation," Robert Hayes said firmly, his human perspective carrying unexpected weight in the supernatural confrontation. "Commander, I felt the same fear you're expressing right now. I thought Dr. Ashworth was going to control my mind, make me compliant, turn me into some kind of supernatural puppet." Hayes stepped forward, his courage in the face of heavily armed supernatural forces inspiring Luna's empathic network with waves of determination. "But empathic connection isn't about control," Hayes continued. "It's about understanding. When Dr. Ashworth touched my consciousness, she didn't change what I felt. She helped me recognize that my fears were shared by the very beings I thought were threatening us." Through her empathic network, Luna felt the moment when several of Stormclaw's tactical forces began questioning their orders. Supernatural beings who had joined the traditional supernatural alliance out of fear were experiencing doubt as they witnessed genuine cooperation between species. Dr. Ashworth, one of Stormclaw's lieutenants, said hesitantly, "Is it true that empathic networking allows supernatural beings to maintain their individual identity? The commander told us that packbinders create hive minds that absorb individual consciousness." Luna smiled, recognizing the genuine curiosity beneath the question. "Would you like to experience it for yourself? I can establish a very light empathic connection that will let you feel what networking is really like." The lieutenant looked between Luna and Commander Stormclaw, clearly torn between orders and the opportunity to understand what they had been sent to destroy. "Don't listen to her," Stormclaw commanded, his authority beginning to crack under the pressure of witnessing his assumptions proved wrong. Packbinder abilities are designed to make supernatural manipulation seem voluntary. But the lieutenant was already stepping forward, his curiosity overcoming his conditioning. "Just a light connection," he said to Luna. "I want to understand what we're really fighting." Luna extended her empathic abilities toward the lieutenant with the same gentle respect she had shown throughout the demonstration. The moment their consciousness connected, his eyes widened with wonder as he experienced the reality of empathic networking. "It's nothing like what we were told," the lieutenant said, his voice carrying amazement and growing conviction. "Commander, she's not controlling my thoughts at all. She's just helping me feel what the humans in this room are feeling. Their concern for their community, their gratitude for the positive changes, their determination to protect something that's made their lives better." Around the auditorium, other supernatural beings from Stormclaw's forces began lowering their weapons as they witnessed their colleagues' genuine response to empathic connection. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," Stormclaw said bitterly. Packbinder influence spreading through supernatural ranks, undermining traditional loyalty, destroying the order that has kept our species stable for centuries. "Vincent," Director Blackwater said, using the commander's first name with the familiarity of old colleagues, "what if traditional order was never as stable as we convinced ourselves it was? What if the territorial conflicts, the species hostility, the constant need for council intervention, what if all of that was actually evidence that our old systems weren't working?" Through her empathic network, Luna felt the moment when Commander Stormclaw's emotional defenses finally cracked. Underneath his fear of change and his desperate clinging to traditional authority, she sensed something heartbreaking, a supernatural being who had spent his entire life enforcing systems that had never brought him genuine connection or satisfaction. "Vincent," Luna said softly, her empathic voice carrying compassion for even this enemy who had come to destroy everything she had built. "You don't have to be afraid of empathic connection. It won't take away who you are, it will help you understand who you could become." For a moment, the auditorium held its breath as Commander Stormclaw stood frozen between his conditioning and the possibility of transformation. Around him, humans and supernatural beings waited to see whether fear or hope would win the battle for his soul. The choice he made would determine not just the fate of the sanctuary territories, but the future of human-supernatural relations throughout North America. Commander Vincent Stormclaw stood in the center of the Community Center auditorium, surrounded by evidence that everything he had believed about supernatural society was wrong. His tactical forces had lowered their weapons, his lieutenant was experiencing empathic connection with wonder rather than resistance, and council authorities were supporting the very integration he had come to prevent. "This can't be real," Stormclaw whispered, his voice carrying the desperation of someone whose entire worldview was collapsing in real time. "Supernatural beings don't cooperate across species boundaries. Humans don't welcome supernatural presence. The Council doesn't support integration. Everything I've witnessed tonight contradicts centuries of established supernatural protocol." Luna felt a wave of compassion flow through her empathic network as she sensed the depth of Stormclaw's confusion and fear. Through her abilities, she could see the painful history that had shaped his rigid adherence to traditional authority, a childhood spent in pack structures that valued conformity over individual expression, decades of military service that demanded absolute obedience to hierarchy, a lifetime of convincing himself that dominance-based leadership was the only thing preventing supernatural society from descending into chaos. "Vincent," Luna said gently, stepping closer despite the very real possibility that his conditioning might trigger a violent response. "What if everything you've been taught about supernatural nature was based on artificial scarcity? What if the territorial conflicts and species hostility weren't inevitable, but were actually the result of systems designed to keep us isolated and afraid?" Stormclaw's emotional signature showed the war between his desperate need to maintain familiar certainties and his growing awareness that those certainties had never actually brought him satisfaction or genuine connection. "I've served the traditional supernatural alliance for 40 years, Stormclaw said, his voice shaking with accumulated grief. "I've enforced territorial boundaries, maintained species separation, prevented integration attempts that supposedly threatened supernatural survival. If what you're saying is true, if empathic connection is beneficial rather than dangerous, then everything I've done has been in service to systems that convinced good people that harm was necessary for protection," Luna finished softly. "Vincent, you're not responsible for the lies you were told or the systems you inherited. You're only responsible for what you choose to do now that you understand the truth." Through her empathic network, Luna felt the exact moment when Stormclaw's emotional barriers finally collapsed. 40 years of accumulated pain, loneliness, and doubt came pouring out in a torrent of grief that made every empathically connected being in the auditorium share his anguish. "I've been so alone," Stormclaw whispered, his voice breaking with the weight of decades spent enforcing isolation while craving connection. The traditional alliance promised purpose, belonging, the satisfaction of protecting supernatural society. But it was all rules and hierarchy, and keeping everyone separate. "I haven't felt genuine connection since." His voice trailed off as Luna's empathic touch helped him access memories he had buried beneath layers of military conditioning. She saw through his consciousness the young wolf he had been before the Alliance recruited him, curious, idealistic, drawn to the possibility of cooperation between supernatural beings rather than endless territorial competition. "Since you were recruited," Luna said, understanding flooding through her as she experienced his memories. "You joined the Alliance because you wanted to protect supernatural beings, but they taught you that protection meant isolation, that safety required dominance, that genuine connection was a weakness that could be exploited." Stormclaw nodded, tears streaming down his face as he experienced empathic validation for feelings he had spent decades suppressing. Around the auditorium, supernatural beings from his own tactical force were watching their commander's transformation with growing understanding of their own suppressed desires for genuine connection. "Commander," the lieutenant who had first experienced Luna's empathic touch said quietly, "we all felt it. The loneliness, the doubt, the sense that something was missing from traditional pack structures. We just didn't have the words for it until tonight." Through her network, Luna sensed the ripple effect of Stormclaw's emotional breakthrough spreading through his forces. Supernatural beings who had spent years enforcing isolation were suddenly experiencing what genuine empathic connection felt like, and the contrast with their previous existence was overwhelming. "This is what the Alliance was afraid of," Stormclaw said suddenly, his understanding expanding as Luna's empathic abilities helped him process the implications of what he was experiencing. Not that packbinders would control supernatural consciousness, but that empathic connection would show us what we've been missing. That supernatural beings would choose cooperation over competition, understanding over dominance. Director Blackwater stepped forward, her expression showing the same mixture of compassion and determination that had driven her own transformation from council hardliner to empathic advocate. "Vincent, the Reformed Council is offering full amnesty to any traditional Alliance members who want to transition to empathic community structures," Director Blackwater said. "Your skills in tactical organization and protective leadership would be valuable in sanctuary territories, but channeled toward cooperation rather than isolation." Luna felt a surge of hope through her empathic network as she sensed the possibility of transforming enemies into allies. But she also detected movement at the edges of her awareness. Not all of the traditional Alliance forces were experiencing Stormclaw's emotional breakthrough. Some of them were retreating, reporting back to Alliance leadership about the corruption of their tactical commander. "Vincent," Luna said urgently, "there are Alliance reinforcements approaching. Leaders who aren't going to be swayed by empathic demonstration, who see what happened here tonight as proof that their fears were justified." Stormclaw's expression hardened with renewed purpose, but this time directed toward protection rather than destruction. "General Morrison leads the hardcore Alliance faction. He'd rather see supernatural society destroyed than transformed. If he's bringing reinforcements, they'll be carrying weapons designed specifically to disrupt empathic networks." Luna felt a chill run through her consciousness as she contemplated the implications. Weapons that could disrupt empathic connections would effectively lobotomize the supernatural beings who had found healing and community through the network. It would be psychological warfare on a scale that made the Council's research facility look like a minor ethical violation. "How much time do we have?" Kai asked, his presence finally reaching the community center as sanctuary reinforcements took defensive positions around the building. "Maybe an hour," Stormclaw replied grimly. "General Morrison's approach will be different from mine. No attempts at containment or conversion. Total network destruction followed by systematic elimination of anyone who experienced empathic connection." Through her network, Luna could sense the fear spreading among sanctuary residents as they contemplated the possibility of losing the empathic bonds that had given their lives meaning and purpose. But underneath the fear was something stronger, determination to protect what they had built, to defend the right to choose connection over isolation. "We need to evacuate the civilian populations," Director Blackwater said, her council training immediately focusing on damage control protocols. "Get human community members to safety, establish protected zones for sanctuary residents who can't fight." "No," Robert Hayes said firmly, his human perspective cutting through supernatural assumptions about civilian vulnerability. "We're not evacuating. This is our community too, and we're not going to abandon our neighbors when they need us most." Around the auditorium, human community members voiced their agreement, their determination to stand with their supernatural neighbors, creating an empathic resonance that strengthened Luna's network beyond anything she had experienced before. "Mr. Hayes," Luna said gently, "General Morrison's forces will be equipped to deal with supernatural resistance. Humans caught in the crossfire will be protected by the same supernatural beings we've been working alongside for weeks." Hayes interrupted. "Dr. Ashworth, you've shown us what genuine cooperation looks like. You can't ask us to abandon that the moment it becomes dangerous. Through her empathic network, Luna felt the unified resolve of humans and supernatural beings who had experienced integrated community and refused to see it destroyed. The traditional alliance had expected to face isolated supernatural resistance. They were about to encounter something unprecedented in the history of human supernatural conflict. Vincent, Luna said, turning to Stormclaw with growing understanding, you know alliance tactics, their weapons, their strategic assumptions. Will you help us defend what we've built here? Stormclaw looked around the auditorium at faces that reflected a new reality. Humans and supernatural beings united by empathic connection, former enemies working together, communities based on understanding rather than dominance. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone who had rediscovered his true purpose. Dr. Ashworth, Stormclaw said formally. Commander Vincent Stormclaw and his tactical unit request permission to join the Sanctuary Defense Forces. We swear by empathic bond to protect this community and the connections that make it possible. Luna felt the empathic network pulse with joy and determination as dozens of former enemies became allies, their combined experience and resources strengthening the Sanctuary's ability to defend itself against the approaching threat. Permission granted, Luna replied, extending her empathic abilities to encompass Stormclaw's forces and integrate them into the Sanctuary network. Welcome to the revolution, Commander. As Alliance reinforcements approached through the mountain darkness, Luna prepared to lead the defense of empathic community against forces that would rather see it destroyed than allow supernatural society to evolve beyond dominance and isolation. The final battle for the future of human-supernatural relations was about to begin. General Marcus Morrison arrived at Cedar Falls with the largest supernatural military force ever assembled in North America, over 300 Alliance warriors equipped with weapons designed specifically to destroy empathic networks and eliminate anyone who had experienced supernatural consciousness integration. His convoy of armored vehicles moved through the mountain passes like a mechanized apocalypse, carrying enough mystical firepower to level a major city. But as Morrison's forces established their assault positions around the community, they encountered something unprecedented in the history of supernatural warfare, an integrated defense network where humans and supernatural beings coordinated their abilities through empathic connection rather than traditional military hierarchy. Luna stood in the community center's renovated command room. Her consciousness expanded across an empathic network that now encompassed over 3,000 individuals across multiple species. Through her connections, she could coordinate defensive strategies with a precision that transcended anything possible through conventional communication. Alliance forces are establishing firing positions on the Eastern Ridge, Commander Stormclaw reported, his tactical expertise now serving empathic community defense rather than traditional territorial control. General Morrison is following standard siege protocols: isolate the target area, eliminate external support, then begin systematic elimination of hostiles. Except we're not hostiles, Dr. Chin pointed out from her position coordinating civilian evacuation routes. We're a legally recognized community with constitutional protections. Morrison's attack is an act of domestic terrorism, not legitimate supernatural law enforcement. Through her empathic network, Luna felt the irony of the situation. General Morrison was so focused on preventing supernatural integration with human populations that he was willing to violate human law and endanger civilian communities to accomplish his goals. Agent Morrison, Luna called through the communication system, reaching out to the former council enforcer who had positioned himself as liaison between sanctuary forces and arriving federal authorities. What's the status with human law enforcement? FBI's Supernatural Crimes Division is en route, Morrison replied, his voice carrying the satisfaction of someone whose professional contacts were finally proving useful. But General Morrison's forces are claiming council authority for their actions, which complicates jurisdictional issues. Luna felt a surge of hope through her network as she realized the implications. If Alliance forces were claiming council authority, Director Blackwater's presence as head of the Reformed Council could legally challenge their right to attack sanctuary territories. Director Blackwater, Luna said, can you officially classify Alliance forces as rogue actors operating without council authorization? Already done, Blackwater replied grimly. I've transmitted formal council repudiation of Alliance actions to all relevant supernatural and human authorities. But Luna, legal technicalities won't matter if Morrison decides to open fire before federal forces arrive. Through her empathic network, Luna could sense the Alliance forces massing for assault, supernatural warriors whose conditioning had taught them that empathic connection was a form of consciousness plague that needed to be eliminated before it could spread further. Their emotional signatures showed fanatic determination mixed with genuine terror of what empathic networking represented. They're not just afraid of losing traditional power structures, Luna said suddenly, her empathic awareness cutting through Alliance propaganda to touch the deeper fears driving their actions. They're afraid of what they might discover about themselves if they experience genuine empathic connection. Kai moved to stand beside her, his alpha presence providing an anchor point for her rapidly expanding abilities. Through their mate bond, Luna could feel his mixture of pride in what she had accomplished and terror at the scope of forces arrayed against them. Luna, maintaining empathic coordination across 3,000 consciousness nodes while under active threat. The strain could kill you, Kai said quietly, his medical training evident in his concern for her physical well-being. But cutting the connections would be worse, Luna replied, her empathic senses showing her the psychological devastation that network disruption would cause. Kai, these people have finally found belonging, purpose, genuine community. Losing that would destroy them more completely than any weapon Morrison could deploy. Through her network, Luna felt the Alliance assault beginning as mystical explosives targeted the community center's power grid and communication systems. But instead of the chaos and confusion that Morrison expected, the empathic network allowed instant coordination of defensive responses. Sanctuary supernatural beings moved with fluid precision to protect critical infrastructure, while human community members evacuated vulnerable populations through routes that had been planned and practiced during weeks of integrated cooperation. The defense was unlike anything in military history, not because it was particularly violent or destructive, but because it was so precisely coordinated that Alliance forces found themselves unable to create the confusion and panic that their tactics required. Impossible, General Morrison's voice crackled through intercepted Alliance communications. Supernatural forces don't maintain discipline under attack. Where's the territorial competition, the species hierarchy breakdown, the individual self-preservation that fragments defensive coordination? Luna smiled grimly as she realized that Morrison's entire strategic approach was based on assumptions about supernatural nature that empathic networking had proven false. Alliance tactics were designed to exploit isolation, competition, and fear, but empathic connection eliminated the psychological vulnerabilities that those tactics required. Commander Stormclaw, Luna called through the network, Morrison's forces are expecting traditional supernatural response patterns. What happens if we coordinate defensive actions through empathic connection instead of territorial hierarchy? Stormclaw's understanding blazed through the network as he grasped the implications. They won't know how to counter organized supernatural cooperation. Alliance training is based on divide-and-conquer strategies that assume supernatural beings will prioritize individual survival over collective defense. But as Luna coordinated increasingly sophisticated defensive maneuvers, her empathic senses detected a new threat approaching from the south. Alliance reinforcements equipped with the empathic disruption weapons that Stormclaw had warned about. Luna, Robert Hayes called from his position coordinating human volunteer support. We're detecting massive electromagnetic interference approaching the community perimeter. Whatever they're bringing, it's designed to disrupt electronic and mystical communication systems. Luna felt her heart sink as she contemplated the implications. Empathic disruption weapons wouldn't just cut her network connections. They would cause psychological trauma to anyone who had experienced empathic bonding, potentially causing permanent damage to their ability to form supernatural connections. How long until the disruption weapons reach effective range? Luna asked. Maybe 10 minutes, Stormclaw replied, his tactical assessment carrying grim precision. Luna, once those weapons activate, your network will collapse and everyone connected will experience acute psychological shock. We need to either evacuate the empathically connected or find a way to shield the network from technological disruption. Through her network, Luna felt the wave of fear that swept through sanctuary residents as they contemplated losing the empathic connections that had given their lives meaning and purpose. But underneath the fear was something stronger: determination to protect what they had built, no matter the cost. "There's a third option," Luna said suddenly, her understanding expanding as she touched the consciousness of every being within her network. "Instead of trying to shield the network from disruption, we expand it beyond the range of any weapon." "Luna, that's impossible," Director Blackwater protested. "Empathic networks require physical proximity for stability. Long-distance consciousness integration has never been successfully maintained because it's never been attempted with enough network nodes to create self-sustaining empathic resonance," Luna replied, her abilities already reaching beyond the immediate sanctuary territory. "What if we connect every supernatural being within a 1,000-mile radius? Create an empathic network so large and distributed that no weapon could disrupt all the connections simultaneously?" Through her expanded awareness, Luna could sense supernatural beings across the continent: isolated wolves in Canadian territories, urban vampires in major cities, fey communities in protected forests, even dragons whose ancient consciousness had been awakened by reports of empathic revolution. "Dr. Ashworth," Agent Morrison's voice carried urgency through the communication system. "Federal authorities report massive supernatural convergence throughout North America. Supernatural beings are leaving their territories, abandoning traditional pack structures, moving toward empathic integration sites." Luna felt her heart race as she realized the scope of what was happening. Her expansion of the empathic network wasn't just reaching supernatural beings, it was calling to them, showing them the possibility of connection that transcended every boundary fear had created. "The final battle isn't going to be fought here in Cedar Falls," Luna said, her voice carrying certainty that resonated through every consciousness node in her network. "It's going to be fought in the hearts and minds of every supernatural being who has to choose between isolation and connection, between dominance and empathy, between the fear that separates us and the love that brings us together." As Alliance disruption weapons approached their target coordinates, Luna prepared to attempt the most ambitious empathic networking in supernatural history: a continental consciousness connection that would either transform supernatural society forever or destroy it in the attempt.